maybe even the nation. So with that, I'd ask Brian to come forward and present the 2014 Trophy Game Wildlife Conflict Summary.
Thanks, Scott. Director Talbot, President Clouda, members of the commission. Are we ready to go? Just press forward. Okay. So, as per usual, in January, I typically come and give an update to you folks on the conflicts that we deal with our large carnivores, which include what's legally defined as trophy game animals in the state: black bears, mountain lions, grizzly bears, and wolves. And the short definition of conflict, basically, it's got to just cause some bona fide damage. It's not a grizzly bear eating dandelions in somebody's front yard. It's bona fide property damage, livestock damage, human injury, or human-caused death of one of these critters, you know, being poached or something of that nature. So this is a busy slide, but basically it breaks down everything by region. Cody region is always extremely busy. They have an abundance of wolves over there, and they're busy earlier in the spring than pretty much everybody, and as late in the fall as any other region. So, but statewide, we dealt with almost 400 conflicts again this year, which is pretty typical of what we have seen in about the past 5-6 years. So, black bear conflicts were a little higher this year. Of course, those grizzly bear conflicts occur in northwest Wyoming, and as well as the wolf conflicts too. Not that we don't have wolf conflicts other places, but seeing as how most of the state they're classified as predators, we don't really record the conflicts that occur there because they're handled either by individuals or wildlife services or whatever the case may be there. So here's the distribution of those conflicts. Again, northwest Wyoming has the abundance of those critters, but we do see some sporadic conflicts with black bears and mountain lions throughout the state. Had a little bump of black bear conflicts down in the Laramie region. You know, bears seeking alternative food sources down off the face of the mountain. So to break down grizzly bear conflicts, for example, 164 recorded conflicts. And it is important to note, too, that these are minimum. All these conflicts, we're very meticulous in classifying an incident as an actual conflict. Again, these are minimum, and if we can't verify that this occurred, we don't have evidence that something actually happened, we just make it a wash. It just doesn't even count in the database. So in order of greatest to least here, livestock was our major source of conflict. Basically, grizzly bears killing cattle was our highest source of conflict with grizzly bears this year. As in contrast to last year, we had a really high percentage of aggression towards human bears taking harvested carcasses from people, getting into hunting camps and that type of stuff. That almost was non-existent this year. And exactly how we explain that, you can't. Abundance of natural foods is probably a big contributor to that, but livestock depredation has no correlation with abundance of natural foods. It seems like we can have, for example, a great white bark pine crop, which usually leads to fewer grizzly bear conflicts on an annual basis, but that doesn't correlate with livestock conflicts. Okay? You can have bears killing a lot of livestock in years where even white bark pine production is really high, and vice versa. So that same correlation that holds true for bears, let's say, getting into the lowlands and you know, trying to get into grain sheds and different things, doesn't hold true for livestock depredation. So what did we do with those bears that got into trouble? Well, we caught 22 different bears, relocated most of them, 16 of them, and we removed 6 of those bears. Now, by removal, that could also include a live removal to a zoo. For example, was the case with one grizzly bear this year. But they're removed from the ecosystem because they don't come back. If they're gone, they're counted as a mortality because they don't come back to the Yellowstone ecosystem at all. One natural mortality in the system, one roadkill, and 5 are currently under investigation. For example, self-defense, reported self-defense incidents where people had to shoot a grizzly bear. Those are currently under investigation, primarily by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So black bear conflicts, again, pretty average for the past. Yes, sir. Mr. Anselmo.
Excuse me, President Clotter. What's a 13 down there? Grizzly bear n equals 13. We're back up there.
Okay, so that's total mortalities in the ecosystem. So we removed 6 of them as an agency. 1 was reported as died naturally, 1 roadkill, and 5 mortalities are currently under investigation.
So then you have another 8 or 7.
13. That's 13, right?
6 more. We had 6. Oh, 7.
Yeah, 13. 6, 1, 1, 5, 13
okay.
total mortalities. Because a removal is a mortality. Like I said, even if it's a live removal or a lethal removal by us, it's considered a mortality. So.
All right, thanks.
We good? Okay. So black bear conflicts, again, pretty much average over the past 4 or 5 years, but we did see a little bump in black bears getting into garbage in Jackson this year. I'll talk about that a little bit. We don't have a lot of livestock depredation that occurs with black bears. Most of it is they're wandering down, they're getting into people's camps, around their homes, in town. We have a little bit of sheep depredation going on. Some beehive damage in areas, and those are areas where probably we haven't had any in the past. Because if we've had black bear or grizzly bear damage with beehives in the past, it's fenced. That's a significant damage claim when a bear gets in there and destroys that stuff. Pretty good commodity going on there. So we make an effort to secure those things with electric fences. So any new beehive damage that we get is usually exactly that. It's not something that we've had in the past. So with those bears, again, we've captured 22, relocate most of them, but we do lethally remove some bears on an annual basis, and hopefully we can find a home for those hides and skulls, some sort of educational or research facility, museum, schools, that type of thing. So mountain lion conflicts, relatively few on an annual basis. Most of it is sheep depredation. But we do have a few mountain lions on occasion coming in, killing a house cat or a small pet. And on the rare occasion, you'll have a lion just acting unusual towards a human. Okay, unusual aggression, middle of the day in somebody's yard type of deal. And we deal with those as swiftly as we can. So we caught 6 mountain lions this year. 3 of them were in town. 2 of them were associated with cattle, and 1 with sheep. And we lethally removed 3 of them, and actually the 3 that were in town are the ones that we relocated. We typically don't do that, but based on the specific circumstances this year with those lions, 2 of them were in Cody and 1 of them was in Pavilion, actually. They just, we felt they were no threat to people, even though we have a very low tolerance for mountain lions in town. Based on these specific circumstances, we did relocate these lions. So that's where the 3 that were relocated actually came out of the 3 that were in municipalities. Wolf conflicts, of course, that's almost entirely livestock, cattle. And this is only until September 23rd when the court ruling then took our management authority away. So it would, we'd probably add a significant percentage to this if we monitored those critters past that date, but we did. So this is pretty consistent with what we've seen the past couple of years. Now this slide, it's a little busy, but so based on all the depredation and whatnot that was going on, the Wyoming Game and Fish removed 13 wolves in northwest Wyoming. 11 wolves were removed on livestock owner lethal take permits. 1 wolf was removed in defense of property. And then post-delisting, the Fish and Wildlife Service removed 6 additional wolves. most in response to livestock depredation. So, what's that add to 13, 14, 25, about 29, 30 wolves killed this year, I guess, in response to livestock depredation, basically from agency or livestock producers. So we did catch a lot of wolves this year, and most of that occurred, last year, last January. It was basically, we were still early in our monitoring efforts, so we really jumped in and we got these packs that we knew existed that we didn't have radio collars in. We got collars in those packs. We were going to monitor things right. And so we did have a high percentage of captures last year. We caught 51 total. Again, most of them were in January and February last year. But throughout the summer, we did incidentally capture some wolves. So that's why that number is pretty big. We don't expect that to occur on a regular basis when and if we have authority from this point forward. So what does all this mean in terms of money? Of course, you know, our compensation program is one of the most liberal in the world. And so, and this slide's going to differ just very slightly from what may be in your packet just by one number. But so almost $600,000 we pay in trophy game damage claims. And you can see if you add up livestock and then bees and honey and what's associated there, you know, that's over half of what we pay pretty much in total for damage claims for the year. It's just a significant portion. So what's going on now with all these large carnivores throughout the state? And roadside grizzly bears is definitely an issue, but it's not really the bears that's an issue, it's the people. Okay, the bears grazing roadside isn't that big of a deal, but it's all the people and the photographers and everybody just trying to get close. That's what causes an issue. Not only danger to the people, danger to the bears, it's a traffic hazard, I could go on and on. But it's definitely an issue that we're trying to address, especially that Togety Pass area. You know, we dealt with this on the highway, the North Fork Highway west of Cody for years. I think we've made a lot of leaps and bounds to help resolve a lot of those issues, but now we're seeing those in other places, like I say, especially around Jackson. We're getting bears. When you have an individual bear show up in an area, that doesn't necessarily mean you got a population of bears. But when you have a family group, you have a breeding female in an area, that means she's established a home range and you have an established population. And so we're seeing as this expansion of grizzly bears specifically occurs, we're getting these family groups in subdivisions, developed areas, and then around depredation sites, we're having multiple bears day after day occupying these areas. I talked about Jackson area black bear conflicts. Well, every so often we have a big bump in conflicts that occurs around Jackson. And this was one of those years. It wasn't a tremendous bump, but we did catch a lot of bears right in and around the town of Jackson. In fact, almost all of our conflicts in the Jackson region were within the city limits. So we're doing a lot of efforts with that, with the Planning and Zoning Commission there in Teton County. We got basically bear priority zones, we call them, where people have to store their garbage, store their attractants in certain places where they don't. We're revisiting all that stuff and doing a lot of efforts to help minimize those conflicts that are occurring there. Mountain lions in town, again, we had 3 this year, which is relatively unusual. If you have deer in your town, no matter where you live in the state of Wyoming, I guarantee you have mountain lions in town. That's just the way it works. They typically don't cause a lot of conflict. They act relatively natural, but the potential for a significant conflict is definitely there. So we're pretty aggressive handling those critters in town. And so I constantly talk, and you guys will probably think I'm a broken record year after year talking about these grizzly bears expanding into new areas. And I don't know if you can see that bear right there. But we have bears showing up everywhere. Farmlands, you know, Wyoming Range, the Basin, Jackson Hole, roadside stuff. And it's becoming pretty significant. But as like Harry Haru always said, well, show me the data. Well, you know, this is our basically current grizzly bear distribution map. And bears aren't just, you know, obviously in Yellowstone anymore and surrounding wilderness areas. They are expanding tremendously. So here's a slide of grizzly bear human conflicts up until 1990. Okay, and then you add another decade through 2000, and then you add another decade through 2013. Okay, you can just see the data shows you those grizzly bears are expanding east and south in Wyoming, and with that comes significant increase in conflicts of everything that we never imagined. You know, cornfield, irrigation pipe, you name it. You know. These conflicts are becoming new to us all the time. Yeah, I don't know if you can see those. Those are bear tracks on that pipe. That's kind of neat. But, so yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword there. You know, successful recovery, increased workload, that type of deal. And the scariest part about that are these aggressive, you know, bears. I honestly believe that it's risky management to promote, you know, the expansion of these grizzly bears because they are potentially very dangerous. And so it's important for us to be on top of things, and we are. We work very proactively in communities with land management agencies because even though not all bears are aggressive, it's those that are, they're going to cause some significant concerns. So we do a lot of outreach statewide. We have a specific Bearwise Wyoming program. Dusty Lassiter is our Bearwise coordinator out of Cody and does a fantastic job, you know, for being an AWAC. Puts in a lot of hours, very knowledgeable, good with folks. But on top of that, every single member of the large carnivore program, in addition to all the biologists and wardens in every single region, spend a tremendous amount of time working with publics, you know, data analysis, you know, securing attractants, everything that it takes to be proactive and reactive, unfortunately, to handling these conflicts. This is such, I can't stress how big of a part this is of what we do on an annual basis. You know, and these are just some of the things, you know, this year. We still have this interactive touchscreen bear display it's on tour around the state, and the kids really love it. You know, they touch the screen and they can make different things happen. Very educational. And then there's this Brutus is the name of this bear up in Montana. He's this live, of course, tame bear. And we filmed him before Lindsay left us. She was up there, and we did some live filming of him. Of course, you know, the pseudo campsite, him tearing up and different things, and bird feeders and whatnot. So hopefully that'll be a great educational tool that you guys will see soon. The Park County Carcass Management Program has been a great success. Lots of carcasses, over 100 carcasses removed in 2014 alone, almost 700 carcasses in the past several years. Funds provided by many sources, the ADMB, Park County Predator Board, Wyoming Bear Hunters Association, and the Park County Commission. So this is a good thing. Basically, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, people can kind of sign up, even though it's free for the most part. There's the concept that a carcass is an attractant, which we know it's not a concept, it's a fact, that a carcass can attract a bear down, let's say, into your during cabin season in the spring, tracks a bear down low, and all he's doing is attracted to meat, and he's feeding on it, but you got all these calves running around, and he goes ahead and starts nailing those calves. Okay? So instead of a alternative feeding program or diversionary feeding that other states were trying to look at and doing different things, we decided, well, let's just get these carcasses out of there. But it is a cost to take it to the dump and different things. So we're kind of liaison between landowners and the individual that's actually hired to do this. They call, hey, we got a carcass, whatever, 2, 3 of them. He goes, scoops them up, takes them off. Doesn't cost them anything. And we have seen a decrease in at least bear use and some decrease in conflicts in those areas. So it's working. It's a good bang for the buck there. So Lander and Dubois, we've got a big sanitation program going on there. We've spent, approximately $40,000 in grant monies this year to get bear-resistant trash cans and whatnot distributed anywhere from Forest Service campgrounds to private individuals, BLM campgrounds, the works. So really, really working well to decrease the number of bear conflicts that occur. Of course, it's a statewide involvement. I talked about all regions, all biologists, wardens, and supervisors, of course, are intimately involved in large carnivore management. And then the section ourselves, I just can't go on without mentioning all the folks. We have a pretty big section. The starred folks are AWAC people currently, and but it's a big section of people that contribute to keeping conflicts to a minimum, people safe. Again, our education efforts, this is Zach Gregory, who works for us seasonally in Pinedale, putting up some door hangers. Had a report of a bear around a neighborhood. We never actually confirmed it, but it's a good chance to go knock on the doors. Public's concerned. We do have a lot of places now where there's voluntary attractant storage, and that's great. And it's kind of that you got to keep up with the Joneses type of deal. Your neighbor gets a bear-proof trash can, you got to do the same. So. And there are places, especially in Teton County, for example, where there's required food storage, and of course most Forest Service land it is required. When we target specific offending animals and either remove or relocate them, we deal with that specific critter. It reduces conflicts, and it builds good working relationships with everybody. Like I said, whether it's an agency, NGO, or member of the public, it works real well. So, like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, a good natural food year is really key to reducing overall conflicts, with the exception of livestock conflicts. If bears are within that carrying capacity, the habitat that can support X number of bears, there's enough food to feed them. They won't go looking for food elsewhere, in people's backyards. So that's all we can hope for, a lot like the moisture-related, fawn production and everything that Mr. Smith talked about. So with that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Question for Brian?
Can you, President Cloud, at the beginning, those numbers you were of the conflicts, that was 2014 conflict?
Correct.
So that ended, 2014 year ended last June.
Right. No, it's calendar year, December
okay.
3rd, end of December 2014, yeah, calendar year conflict.
Oh, so it's just the last couple months.
Yep.
And then you had the list of the payouts, but that was from 13, I think.
That is fiscal year.
Uh,
Yeah, those are compiled by fiscal year, so they don't necessarily coincide, but since we compare those apples, fiscal year to fiscal year to fiscal year, versus the oranges of conflicts, calendar year to calendar year, it works out. So we can see the trends that way.
Excuse me. I know last winter we did all that coloring of those wolves. Then does the Fish and Wildlife have that, or you guys have that, or how the hell does this work after they took over the listing again? What happened?
After delisting, we didn't do any monitoring of any kind, any management. So that was all reverted to the Fish and Wildlife Service because we did not have any authority.
Anybody else for Brian? I have a question. Prior to delisting of the wolf, if a wolf was trying to eat your dog, you could dispatch the wolf. Is that true?
That's true. That's correct.
Since relisting, you're not allowed to dispatch that wolf unless he's into your livestock. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If he's into Fifi, you can't dispatch that wolf. Is that
correct?
Okay.
And there's even some additional stipulations if he's in your livestock. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Fifi is about as important as Charlton's cows sometimes. Just saying.
Explain the reason why that is. It's the 10J rule that we ended up on.
Exactly. The federal rules are a little bit more restrictive. You know, they consider the animal still under the endangered species. Its population is in peril. You know, threats by humans, and so any take of those critters, whether it be a wolf or a bald eagle, are far, far more restrictive. So.
Anything else for Brian? Could you step aside? Sam wants to come up and.
I just want to ask a question. Have we got, I know they stopped us from being able to take out wolves and all. Have we moved to that when they granted us to step in on my understanding to start with was that our game of fish couldn't even go in and take a wolf out and take calves out or something like that. So there, should we progress past that?
They're still listed federally, Sam, so we have no authority whatsoever to manage wolves in any way.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
See you next year.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're not, Hank.
I'm going to introduce the world renowned.
Okay.
Commission President Cloud, Commissioner Director Talbot, I guess I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Hank Edwards. As you all know, Hank is the Wildlife Disease Laboratory Director in Laramie and is a very knowledgeable and educated person with regards to wildlife disease, and he's going to provide two updates on our disease sampling efforts here over the last year and several years. And the first one will be CWD, and then the second one will be brucellosis. So they're two separate agenda items, but I've just introduced Hank once. So with that, I'd like to welcome Hank to come up and wow us with his knowledge.
Wow.
You have high expectations. President Kluda, fellow commissioners, and Mr. Talbot. So thank you for inviting me to talk to you about both CWD and brucellosis, two big diseases that we deal with, two diseases that take up the vast majority of my laboratory and laboratory staff time. So I'm going to talk about CWD first. Many of you will remember that probably in 2006 we undertook a pretty large surveillance project to try and determine where CWD occurs across the entire state. So we put forth a tremendous effort and did for several years. Since then, funding for CWD surveillance has fallen away, at least for federal funding, and brucellosis has taken up more of our laboratory's time. So CWD is still important. I want to make that point that although we don't do as much surveillance as we used to, it's still a big deal. So hopefully I'll cover some of those aspects here. Can I have the lights turned down? Thank you. So first of all, I'll talk about what exactly is chronic wasting disease. And it is simply a fatal disease of white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, and moose. We don't see CWD going to pronghorn or bighorn sheep or any other critters. So far, it's pretty well restricted just to the deer family. CWD is classified as a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. I always screw up the how do you pronounce that last word, but nonetheless, it is an infectious disease of the brain, and it causes small sponge-like holes to form in the brain. That's how it gets its name. So what exactly is a TSC? Well, you can see that humans have a whole bunch of TSCs. Some of them are genetic mutations, some of them are transmitted by cannibalism, and some of them were acquired by eating BSE contaminated meat. So obviously cattle have BSE, sheep have scrapie, and then mink and cats and of course cervids have their own. So what causes all this? Well, it's a prion. So for us disease guys, we're used to dealing with either bacteria or viruses. This is neither. This is an infectious piece of protein, and that's actually where prion gets its name. It's prion plus infection. So all of us have this prion in our normal cells. It's a normal protein, and it doesn't cause any problem. But when this protein takes on this unique shape, that's how it causes disease. So it's not only the shape that gives us disease, but the shape also lends it to be incredibly resistant or stable. So it's really resistant to environmental desiccation, degradation from UV and other things like that. Things that, you know, living in Wyoming, that's our advantage, right? It's dry, the sun shines here, nothing really survives except us maybe. So prions are very, very resistant to that, and that's how they can build up in the environment. Also, prions are not inactivated by the common disinfectants, nor are they inactivated by normal cooking temperatures. So somebody sat down and drew up this confirmation of what a normal prion might look like, and as opposed to a prion that would cause CWD. And not that this diagram is important, except that prions really don't have a good way to replicate, right? They're not a bacteria or a virus, so they can't undergo normal cellular replication. The way that prions work is when a CWD or TSC prion comes in contact with the normal prion that we all have in our cells, it forces it to take on its conformation. So when one prion bumps into a normal cell, it changes it. Those two bump into two more. Then you got four. Those four bump in, and et cetera, et cetera. So you get this doubling replication, and until you get quite a few prions within the host. And it's the accumulation of those prions that cause these holes in the brain. So again, that's where the spongy holes, that's where the name comes from. And it's these holes that lead to some of the clinical signs of CWD. Obviously, with chronic wasting disease, where its name comes from, very poor body condition, severe emaciation, rough hair coat, droopy ears, etc. We see behavioral changes in some of our research animals where they're very reluctant to move, but the minute you constrain them, then they essentially just flip out, and making them very, very difficult, if not impossible, to control. Some animals are very lethargic. They just don't move hardly at all until they're approached within a certain limit. So if a hunter was to approach an animal that's standing next to water, let's say, that animal is able to kind of snap out of CWD and walk away and be perfectly normal, at least for a short time. So other things that we see is excessive salivation most of the time, as well as excessive drinking. So these animals tend to drink and drink and drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. So they were often found near water. And one thing I want to point out here, actually two things. One is many of these signs that I've described here are not specific just for chronic wasting disease. There's lots of diseases that animals would display these signs. Second thing is animals that are infected with CWD will not come up with these signs until the last, say, month or so of life. But they can be infected for a year or 17 months or even longer, still test positive on our test, but they'll be perfectly normal, at least appear normal. It's only in the last stages where they really start to circle the drain and show some of these signs here. A little more specifics about the disease. Age, they got to be greater than 6 months, at least that's when they'll be positive on our tests. Both sexes are affected. How they become infected, it's really unknown, but most likely it's oral. Transmission, again, unknown, but it's probably prion-infected saliva, urine, feces, environmental contamination, as well as possibly feed, soil, insects, other vectors are possible. Incubation, probably at least 17 months. Genetics have a role in that. Different genotypes will have a longer incubation period. Some people feel that at this point that there's no genetic true resistance, that eventually they will succumb to the disease. But we have one elk at Sebile, Lucky, aptly named, who is now 12 years old and still lives at Sebile. So the jury's still out.
And has he been infected almost 12 years?
No. Well, it's a she, and actually we did some testing on her, and unfortunately she's gotten to the age now where she's impossible to test. We've run out of tissue to test on her, but every test that we've done has been negative.
Oh, okay.
So we've never, she's to our knowledge, she's not infected.
Oh, I got you. Okay, I took it the wrong way.
So here's a few pictures of some of the elk at our research facility. Again, you can see the salivation, very poor body condition, droopy ears. Classic picture of a deer, same thing, very rough body condition, very thin, droopy ears, kind of depressed. There's an elk, again, droopy ears. A good analogy that I've heard is that the lights are on but nobody's home. You can look in their eyes and they're very, very blank stare. We also see it particularly with elk. You kind of get the Bart Simpson haircut there where the hair between the ears stands straight up. And also, for some reason, they don't lose their hair coat. At least some of them don't. And that can be a key for us to feel that that animal is likely in the end stages of CWD. But the vast majority of cases that come through my laboratory are from animals that look like this. And I stated that earlier, but of all the hunters that I talked to on the phone, most of them are very, very, very shocked that their animal had CWD. I don't know how many times I've heard that, no, that's impossible, this animal was very fat. There's no way it had CWD. But remember, they can have the disease for a very long time before they start to lose their body condition. So why should we care about CWD? Well, I'm going to talk about three aspects of that: human health, livestock health, and then finally wildlife health, and how CWD relates to all those. First of all, of course, the big concern is BSE. It's a TSE just like CWD, and the big concern was, as people are eating CWD positive animals, that they too would end up with something similar to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And if you remember back in the UK, about 1992, we had a peak of over 37,000 cases of BSE positive cattle a year. That's phenomenal. That is a lot of critters. And as they started to remove those to be able to got better at identifying them and removing them from the feed chain, they stopped feeding scrapie infected meat products to those cattle, and the incidence of BSE started to drop until I think currently we're down to just about zero, if we're not at zero. And then, but what we observed was cases of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease started to actually increase. Normally it occurs in about 1 in a million in the population, and that's just due to genetic mutations, random genetic mutations in the population. But in the UK, it peaked at about 22 or 27 cases in the year 2000. And those obviously started to drop off as cases of BSE were removed from the population. But to date, we've seen no indication that CWD will go to humans. Research has indicated that it's unlikely but not impossible, and I think it's important to stress that. It's not impossible for humans to contact CWD from infected deer or elk. The incident rate of CJD, remember I said it was about 1 in a million. For Wyoming and Colorado, we're actually less than that 1 in a million. So, and these are two states where CWD has been endemic for greater than 25 years. Actually, it's probably closer to 50 years. Humanized mice, when they genetically engineer mice to be more like humans and fed them some CWD material, those mice did not come down with CWD-like lesions. And also, when they infected primates 6 years ago with CWD orally, those animals still are normal. So that research is still going, but so far those animals are fine. The same can be said for livestock. Through several research projects, both with Wyoming Game and Fish, Colorado Division of Wildlife, and the Wyoming State Vet Lab, they took sheep and orally inoculated them with CWD-infected brain, and those sheep did not come down with CWD. 10 cattle orally infected with CWD and held in isolation for 10 years. Those cattle did not come down with CWD. And then finally, 20 cattle that lived amongst infected deer and elk, both at our facility and at Colorado Division of Wildlife. showed no signs of the disease after 10 years. And if you can see that picture of the cattle on the, or the cow on the left, he obviously has never missed a meal since he hit this field. So thus far, there's no scientific evidence to support CWD transmission from deer or elk to domestic livestock. And certainly when you consider the number of potentially infected deer and elk that share range with cattle across the state of Wyoming, to date there's been no documented transmission from those wildlife to domestic species. Moving on to the wildlife part. The problem with CWD is we really don't know that much about it. Like a lot of diseases, we really don't have a great handle on it. So at this point, we really don't know if CWD is going to have a profound effect on populations or not. A lot of research has suggested that it is very likely to have a very large impact, particularly on our deer populations. And that stands to reason. We certainly have some populations where our prevalence is exceeding 40%, close to 50% in some. It's hard to imagine if you're going to lose 50% of your population to CWD that it isn't going to have a population effect. So, but quite honestly, the jury's still out on that. It's not that clear cut. The problem is there isn't a lot we can do about it. Eradication is almost impossible, if not impossible, because this disease can result from environmental contamination. So getting rid of the prion in the soil is not going to be easy. It's going to be impossible. Yes?
So I have a question. You know how we'll, maybe just us lay people who aren't as knowledgeable as you are in it, but we'll talk about CWD as being particularly prevalent from different years to different years and say, oh, we've got a real outbreak of it going. So because it can stay in the soil, is that because there are certain environmental factors that make it a more prevalent issue on certain years, or are we just saying something that hasn't any basis of true knowledge?
As far as outbreaks, I don't think outbreak would be a proper term. If we look at the prevalence of CWD in some of our deer populations, you kind of see a slow, steady increase. There may be some blips along the road, but all in all, it's kind of a slow, steady increase, as opposed of a very high incidence one year down to almost nothing the next year. Although we do see that in our elk populations from time to time. So to say it's an outbreak would not be quite correct. In terms of different soils and persistence in different soils, yes, there is something to that. Different clay soils are able to bind and hold on to the prion much better than other soils. So yeah, soils do have a role in environmental persistence of this organism.
Thank you, Dan.
Anyway, we don't have a lot of tools in the toolbox, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But some of the things that we can do, and some things that other states have tried, one is simply a large-scale population reduction where we just reduce densities. And by reducing densities, we're just reducing the number of animals out there, whether they be positives and other susceptible individuals as well. So you're not stopping the spread of CWD, but you're probably slowing it down a bit. Other things we can do, and we do this in our agency, is limit environmental contamination. So we remove those positive animals, and by doing so, we're eliminating that source of infection to other deer and elk in the area. So we ask that hunters, when they get a positive animal, that they dispose of that in a landfill. And then when we remove targeted animals as an agency, they're disposed of in a landfill as well. But as I mentioned, the problem is, like a lot of diseases we deal with, our toolbox is empty. We really don't have a lot of effective tools to combat CWD. Right now, there's really no vaccines that are currently available for use in the wild. We're evaluating one at the Thorne Williams Wildlife Center, but it's a long ways from being used in the field. In fact, we're just in the stage where we're evaluating how useful it may be. But certainly usual approaches of killing mass amounts of deer, like happened in Wisconsin, is not stomached so well by the public now. So that's really not considered a usual means of controlling this disease. So certainly Wyoming and Colorado, we've taken their approach of really learning to live with this disease. And we do that with public education, try and educate the public, hey, don't shoot an animal that looks like it has chronic wasting disease. Rather report that to the Game and Fish Department. We provide testing both through the Game and Fish and the Wyoming State Veterinary Laboratory. And again, as I mentioned, removal of positive animals from the landscape is a good idea. Okay, how do we survey for this disease? As I mentioned at the start of this talk, in 2004 to 2010, we did the full meal deal sampling. We sampled between 4,000 and 6,000 samples a year across the entire state. And that's about as much as our laboratory could handle. As with the drop of federal funding, we've since cut that about in half, and we've kind of modified our surveillance program a little bit. We collect hunter-killed samples, that's a vast majority, and we get those any way we can get them, at meat processors, check stations, head drops, however the case may be. In addition, we also sample both targeted and road-killed samples. So targeted means an animal showing signs of CWD. Those are the ones we want to sample. We make results available to the hunters in less than 3 weeks on the department's website, and they can just simply log in, giving a number we've given them when we collected their sample, and get their results. I also send them a letter for hunters who are unlucky enough to harvest a positive animal, and let them know their animal tested positive, and that letter gives them legal permission to dispose of that animal if they choose to do so in a landfill. If we, as an agency, leave it up to them, they can consume that positive animal if they wish, or they can dispose of it. So for 2014, as I mentioned, we shifted our surveillance rather than statewide. We moved to the western leading edge of our known endemic area, and that pretty much threw us into the Green River, Lander, Dubois, Jackson, as well as the National Elk Refuge. That's where we put most of our efforts. Not that we didn't sample other places, but that's where we put most of our efforts. In addition, we also sampled our core endemic area, and that is where we've seen CWD for a long period of time. So that was deer hunt area 65 and 66, and elk 7. So for 2014, we collected 1,600 samples, and of those, 110 were positives. So that was 848 mule deer with 83 positives, 189 whitetail deer with 12 positives, 542 elk, and 53 moose. The vast majority of our surveillance is hunter killed, as you can see, but we also sampled 8% targeted and 6% road killed. Unfortunately, we found 7 new hunt areas for CWD this year. Now, last year we didn't find any, so this year we made up for it. Normally we get somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 hunt areas a year. This year we found 7. So new areas obviously are outlined there in red. Those areas where you see the hash marks, that is where we have identified CWD anytime in the past. So the endemic area, if you will. Same is not true for elk. We only found 1 positive area for elk. And you can see there's quite a difference, can't you, between this map, you can see how far CWD ranges in our deer areas, as opposed to this map. CWD in deer is not quite the same as CWD in elk, in that we don't have near as many cases in elk. Our prevalence is significantly less in elk, usually less than 10%, even in the same areas where our deer may be 40%. So we don't see near as many new areas, nor do we see the prevalence like I mentioned. This is a map that shows you where we sampled. You can see all those black dots, those are all negatives. Red dots are positives. You can see we did a pretty good job sampling around the National Elk Refuge, Cody, the region, up in the Bighorns. That was in conjunction with some brucellosis surveillance, the Black Hills, and then of course our core endemic area. If you remove the positive, remove the negatives, you can get a very good feel for where the positives occur. The vast majority occur in our core endemic area. I could have put up a map from 2005 13 and 12 and 10, they look just like this. Those areas where you see a dot outside of the slashed areas, those are the new hunt areas for this year. But again, most of our positives are in the core endemic area, a few around Cody, and a few around Sheridan. That's all I have on CWD. It's hard to cover CWD in a half hour and do a decent job. So I'm sure that I skipped over most of the details and just hit a few of the high points, and they were the very highest points. So if any of you have questions or want more information, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to send you whatever I can via email. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah.
Mark's got.
Okay, excuse me. What you said you've shifted to surveillance. Rough numbers. How much are you spending for to find a vaccine or a cure, and how much is used for surveillance? Do you have any? How much your time or money is spent? Doing the surveillance, and how much time and money is being spent to? I guess it's a multi-state deal. 2 other states are doing things too, I suppose. Colorado.
Yes, sir. I really don't have a good feel for how much we're paying to do our vaccine research. That's in cooperation with a company out of Canada who supplied that vaccine to us at no charge. But we still have the cost of feeding those elk currently out at Sebile. Mary, would you like to enter into any of that?
So you have another company that gives you the vaccine. You guys.
Yeah, and this of course is paid through the general fund as well. And as far as our surveillance program, I'm not sure exactly how much our surveillance program is costing now. Do you have a good feel for that, Scott or Brian?
Commission President Clouda, Commissioner Director Talbot, as Hank said, vet services, all their work is funded through the general fund, so it's not coming from Federal Game and Fish sportsman's dollars. We've dramatically decreased, and I couldn't tell you off the top of our head, we used to get quite a bit of federal funding, which was cut, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago with regards to CWD. As CWD decreased across the nation, the federal dollars dried up, so we're able to pick up a handful of temporaries for 2 to 3 months to collect samples, as well as, I believe, Hank, you hire a lab tech. So and then the rest of just the sampling is done, do routine duties of our field personnel at check stations or doing harvest checks in the field, and then a roadkill or something. So the amount of time that's probably actually coded to CWD is our AWACS, Hank's lab tech, and then maybe some of the administrative work. But probably the cost is pretty small of the entire vet services general fund.
I just wonder how much money is being spent to try to find I don't know if a cure is the right word for it or some, I never was good at science. I mean, how much time is being spent with a microscope and whatever you guys do to find a vaccine and whatever, I get the sampling thing, yeah, that you cut out the lymph nodes or whatever you're doing. But do you yourself, or somebody sent you a vaccine, you guys are testing that, you haven't?
We're not in the development.
You're not in, are other states, or I guess, what is the interaction between these other states that have this problem, Wisconsin or Colorado or Nebraska and all that?
I honestly could not answer how much time is being spent as far as from amongst the states and looking for a cure for CWD. It's a tough egg to crack because the prion is in all of our cells, all mammalian cells. So to develop an antibody that is directed right at that cell or right at that protein, you're developing an antibody that's right against the same protein that we all have. So it is very, very difficult to do. Not impossible, but very, very difficult to do. So I really don't have a good feel for how much research dollars or time is being spent towards looking for a cure.
I think it'd be safe to say that the work done by Hank's shop and then our field personnel is probably the highest, or close to the highest in the country on our surveillance efforts and then our associated research efforts. I don't think there's any other state that is doing as much or more than what we're doing with regards to CWD. If I have more data, and then the Sabile facility, which the vaccine trial work there is probably not being duplicated or even come close to by any other state or province.
You said the federal government used to give money for surveillance, and do they have money going out to laboratories or something or don't they see it as a problem, or everybody just throwing their hands up and said they can't?
You know, a lot of the federal funding now is going towards captive cervids. So testing captive cervids in states that allow that, that's where the vast majority of the federal money is now going to. Where they used to fund surveillance in wildlife, no more.
But we've significantly reduced the amount of surveillance we do over the last several years. We've cut that budget, I think, well in half.
Yes, sir.
Is it still appropriate to have that, Scott, that smaller budget, or is that something the commission should look at, maybe prioritizing higher for funding, is doing more surveillance for CWD, or does it really matter? At this point, it's going to take over the state, it's going to take over the state.
I think our current surveillance program and the way we have it outlined on the leading edge and then around the Jackson Pine areas, I think that what we're doing is what we have funding to our general fund budget is meeting our needs. And we always increase funding for that, but I guess the big question is, are we going to get more out of it with increased funding other than what we're getting now? And
What's he going to tell us we don't already know, I guess?
So I think, Mary, if you've got some input, I think our current surveillance regime is meeting the need, and until some magic bullet falls out of the sky that gives us an idea how to really address this thing, we're just trying to monitor, surveil, and then just work on some basic research that'll maybe give us an idea how it spreads and how to prevent it. Would that be fair to say, Hank?
It would. Another part of our surveillance program, another goal, is simply to provide that information to hunters so they know where CWD occurs and where it doesn't. Some people are very concerned, some are not.
So Hank, we've had us, up in Laramie Peak country, we're like ground zero for CWD now, and we've had some hunters from California that they've taken samples from their deer. The deer are healthy looking, just the typical CWD story. You do the testing in the lab. They've already had that animal processed, and they've taken it home with them to California. They have gotten calls now somehow from the sanitation authorities in California that they cannot dispose of those deer in California landfills.
I was not aware of that.
Well, I'm wondering how they get the data to know that hunter's deer is tested positive for CWD in the state of Wyoming.
We used to, now this was the first year we had not done it, but in previous years we used to notify probably 25 states at their request, notify them of every hunter that had harvested a positive deer from their
I wasn't
area.
aware of that. Do we still do that?
We do not. This 2014 was the first year that we had stopped doing it. So
Probably how California found out.
that's correct.
Well, it was too late.
We still notify the hunter, but we no longer notify their home agency.
Well, they had already disposed of the deer in the landfill. Then they got a call from some sanitation engineer that says, you can't just, oh, okay, no problem. We'll eat it, I guess is what their response. I mean, it created quite a conundrum for them.
Yeah, that's too bad because landfills are an accepted method of disposal.
Except for
I
in
thought across the
in
nation,
California.
except for California, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I wonder how they found out that. Can you believe that track?
So just one additional item related to CWD. In 2006, the Commission approved a CWD management plan, and we're in the process now of revamping that plan, and that plan will probably be brought to the Commission for review and approval sometime this late spring. It's been since 2006 it was updated. There's not a whole lot more to add, but it's timely and relevant, and to bring that forward to you folks for review and approval. We have a committee working within the Wildlife Division to update that plan, so you'll be hopefully looking at a plan later this spring. I know probably some of you may have heard about a plan, and that's what it'll be.
Commissioner Price.
I have a question, Hank. You say these prions are resistant. What does it take to completely disable or destroy a prion? Let's say in heat,
That's
light.
a great question. So heat, 1,500 degrees Celsius.
So it pretty well blackened the,
It's incineration. Yeah. Bleach is very effective. So 10% bleach for a half hour, that will work. I wouldn't take your best hunting knife and put it in 10% bleach for a half hour, but it will definitely kill the bleach. Kill the prion. Sodium hydroxide, a strong base. That's another good method. There's some enzymes that are out there that are made to chew up prions, but to my knowledge, they haven't really been tested as far as a broad-scale use. It's tough.
on the other end, how long can it persist in soil? Do you have any estimate of that?
That depends on the soil type, but certainly with Scrapie, they've recorded it longer than 13 years, 13 or 14 years, I believe.
So it does have kind of a finite life.
It is a tough motor scooter, and it will be there for a long time. How long? That's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kohler.
Hank, I listened to a presentation by one of our neighboring states. They've got a elk herd on state parklands that I think it's 20% occurrence of CWD in those elk. They did a mortality study on lion kills, and 80% of the lion kills were CWD elk. And I guess that made me wonder, are we in Wyoming putting enough thought into the role of the predators on helping maintain or contain the spread of CWD? How important of an ally do you think the predators are in Wyoming?
That serves a great question, and I don't think we have a good feel for how many of those positive animals, CWD positive animals, would be removed by a carnivore, actually keeping the disease in check. I've also heard, and this is kind of an interesting take, that when you have a significant prevalence of CWD, then you're actually providing more food, if you will, for predators. Therefore, bringing more predators to the area and perhaps making it harder on many of the other animals that may not have CWD in that herd. How that all actually plays out and being able to actually calculate the effect of CWD may be difficult to do. But I think predators certainly have a pretty significant role in controlling this disease. Certainly, our hunters have a good role in controlling this disease just simply by removing those positive animals from the landscape. That slows this disease at least a little bit.
Yeah, they would be a little more visible and a little easier prey even for hunters.
That's right.
As long as they're not with a herd. Now that picture you showed of that rough-coated old cow elk at Seville, you know, obviously she's not going to be the first one you put your sights on.
That's right.
But if she's out by herself, and the ones I've seen, they don't tend to flee as quickly as the others, and so.
Correct. And we certainly know that like archery hunters are really good at finding CWD positive critters.
I bet they
All they got to do is stand there for that extra 10 seconds or whatever the case may be.
Thanks, Hank.
Anything else for Hank? Does Hank need to get reintroduced? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Director, you had it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, Hank, in the past, there was a fairly significant diversion or a differential between what Colorado was seeing and what we were seeing, specifically in prevalence rates in elk and deer. Have those balanced out now, or are they still quite different?
I believe they're still quite different. I still think they see a lot more CWD in their elk than we see in our elk. I think the deer may be similar, but you know, it's been a while since I've talked to Dr. Miller, so I don't have any up-to-date information. I can find that out for you pretty easily and get back with you. I'm glad to do that. That's a good question.
Do you need to get reintroduced? Or can he just move into the next?
Still everybody else gets it twice.
I know, everybody else gets it twice.
Okay. So the next disease I'm going to talk about is brucellosis. And Quite honestly, brucellosis is one of the reasons that we had to cut back some of our CWD surveillance, simply because brucellosis has become much more of an issue in the last couple of years, and I'll address that through some of my presentations here. So I've kind of thrown this talk together. It's pretty similar to my CWD talk. I'll talk about the disease overview, give you a refresher of CWD. I'll talk about brucellosis in the GYA, or the Greater Yellowstone area, and then finally I'll talk about how we monitor brucellosis in our elk and bison populations across the state. So first of all, Brucella abortus is a bacteria, unlike CWD. Prions that cause that. This is a bacterial disease, and it is found worldwide. This is a big problem. It's a big problem across the world, and it affects a lot of people. It's not just here in Wyoming that we have to futz with this disease. It's an intercellular parasite, which is one of its mechanisms to avoid treatment, and it's one of the reasons that this bacteria is able to persist so long in its host. It's slow growing. In other words, if you were to plate it onto a culture plate, it takes about 3 days to come up, whereas a normal bacteria comes up in about 12 hours. Slow mutation, unlike some of the staphs you hear about, this one is a very slow mutation. That's a good thing for us, because for one thing, we can track it genetically over time because it's a slow mutation. Two is it doesn't build up a resistance to disinfectants and antibiotics. So for the most part, brucellosis is easily killed by most common disinfectants. It's very sensitive to most antibiotics, and it's very susceptible to environmental conditions such as UV radiation and drying out. It does not persist in the environment. Host, this is really a disease of bison and cattle. Brucellosis is very, very efficient in bison and cattle. It's efficient in elk as well, but not near as efficient as it is in bison. It is a disease of the reproductive tract. It infects the placenta, the fetal fluids, testes, and the lymphoid tissues that surround the reproductive tract. Other hosts, just about any host, can get infected with brucellosis. And the prevailing thought is once you're infected for life, whether that be a person or a horse or a cow. It doesn't matter. And the reason is it's so good at hiding in the body and sequestering itself from antibiotics or the immune system, etc. One interesting thing about brucellosis is that it needs a sugar called erythritol. Erythritol is a sugar that occurs in the reproductive tract of ungulates. And in the presence of erythritol, Brucella grows like crazy. Remember I said it took about 3 days to grow? In the presence of erythritol, it'll grow in about 12 hours. So those species that do not have erythritol, such as horses, brucellosis or B. abortus usually does not cause abortion. It can in some rare instances, but for the most part, it does not cause abortion in horses or people or several other species. And of course, treatment of brucellosis is very difficult. In fact, if you're unlucky enough to have a horse that's positive for brucellosis, it's recommended that that animal be euthanized, mostly because treatment is just expensive and it's unsuccessful. So how does the disease progress? Well, most commonly an animal is infected through orally, although a splash to the eye or any mucous membrane will establish an infection. Once that bug enters the body, it moves to the lymphoid system and it colonizes in those lymph nodes, and it hides. It lays in waits. Once it's in those lymph nodes, it lays in waits until, in the case of a female, of course, the start of the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. And then for whatever reason, we really don't have a good handle on, that bug becomes very active in the host, and it moves towards the reproductive tissues. Prior to that, like I said, it's very difficult to detect. Once it moves to the fetus and placenta, it infects the cotyledons, or where the fetus attaches to the mother. It infects those, actually causes enough damage that it's able to cross over into the fetus. It infects the fetus, kills it, and then you get the end is an abortion. Males, of course, can become infected as well, but for the most part, the bacteria doesn't cause a lot of damage. Once in a while, it can certainly cause infection of the testes and some of the secondary sex organs, but for the most part, it's not a big deal in males. Also, this is not a venereal transmitted disease. It's mostly transmitted through abortions and contact of those abortions. So I put up the picture of the cheese, which is kind of weird in this presentation, isn't it? Other than the story behind that is I got a call, been 10 years ago now or so, from the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia, because they had gone to the Walmart in Texas and bought some cheese because many of the people who had previously bought that cheese were sick, coming down with brucellosis. And they were wondering if I'd be willing to culture that cheese for B. abortus. I did. And it wasn't B. abortus, it was Brucella melentensis, which is the serious member of the Brucella family. It infects humans and certainly can cause fatality. So it's a major bug. Nonetheless, brucellosis is a big deal, and it's a big deal in many cheeses, soft cheeses, and unpasteurized milk in some of these poor countries. I would probably recommend against buying any milk or cheese in Walmarts in Texas, but nonetheless, it's a big deal. Undulant fever, that's the name of the disease in humans, and it gets that term because the fever spikes usually in the evening when you're in bed. You get a spike in fever, then it goes back down to normal body temperature, and then we get a spike and then back down, so it undulates through time. This was a big problem, particularly back in the turn of the century, and this is one of the reasons that we pasteurize our milk today. It has an extended incubation time. It can be up to 6 weeks. So people aren't always able to make the connection with the symptoms they're having now with how they may have been exposed 6 weeks ago. You know, I can hardly remember what happened to me yesterday, let alone 6 weeks ago. So as I mentioned before, chronic infections are likely. And for people, some of the common symptoms are malaise, just feel bad, fatigue, night sweats. The night sweats are phenomenal. I've had brucellosis, and when you sweat at night, you literally leave puddles of sweat in the bed. It's like no other night sweats. Depression, Dr. Krieger had brucellosis. He relayed that he got very severe depression to the point of almost suicide, he said, when he had brucellosis. So it's quite a unique disease in that respect. Also, there's a lot of muscle and joint pain that's associated with this bug. It's not a fun disease to get by any means. It's pretty rough. But if you catch it early and you don't procrastinate, you have a 6-week course of antibiotics will usually clear it up in about 70% of cases. If you play tough guy and you wait another couple weeks, the cure rate drops to go on. So it gets down around 40–50% if you let it go long enough. So antibiotics are our friends, and you want to take them. So that's all I'm going to talk about as far as just the disease itself. I'll move on to brucellosis in the greater Yellowstone area itself. Brucellosis is not just a problem in Wyoming, right? It's a problem for Montana, and it's also a problem for Idaho. Although we don't hear a lot from Idaho, they still have a fair amount of brucellosis that they deal with as well. From recent genetic studies, they found that brucellosis was most likely introduced into the GYA sometime around the Civil War. And since then, it's probably been introduced at least 4 more times through different time periods. But when it was first detected, at least in the literature, in bison in 1917 and in elk in 1930. For elk and bison and domestic cattle, normally they just abort their first calf, and then they do not abort subsequent calves after that. So in bison, we find about an 82% abortion rate, so not all will abort their first calf, and in elk, it's about 61%. remember that, as mentioned in the start of this talk, that brucellosis is really a disease of bison and cattle. It's less efficient in elk, and that's relayed there with 61%. It may be responsible for low production rates in bison, 22 to 54%, but populations are still on the increase. It's thought that in some of our endemic areas, our loss in elk is somewhere between 7 and 12% that can be attributed to brucellosis. I'm not sure how you come up with that directly, but anyway, that's what's been stated. And of course, the problem is, as far as keeping elk and bison away from domestic cattle, and that is done currently with the use of feed grounds. So state and federal feed grounds were established in the early 1900s, originally to sustain populations, as well as keeping elk and bison out of private hay stores and to reduce damage. They're now more of an issue both to prevent damage as well as separating cattle from elk. Currently, there are 22 state and 1 federal feed grounds are now currently maintained by the state of Wyoming. As you can see, here's a map of the locations of our feed grounds. Most of our feed grounds are positioned more toward the foothills. So as those elk are moving from their summer range to their winter range, those feed grounds are meant to kind of hold those elk there before they move onto private property. But feed grounds aren't perfect, right? There's a lot of problems with them. And disease transmission can be very, very high on feed grounds, whether it be CWD, whether it be brucellosis or tuberculosis. Those animals are concentrated in very small areas, and their densities can get quite high. So when a bison aborts, like the picture on the left, you can see that it can infect a tremendous number of people, or a tremendous number of critters. So as far as on our feed grounds, our seroprevalence ranges somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% if you average it out, whereas our bison on the National Elk Refuge generally run somewhere in about 65%, 65 to 70%. But it's important to note that all we're detecting when we say seroprevalence, the only thing we can say is that animal was exposed. I think we overinterpret our serological data, but all it means really is that animal was exposed. It certainly does not say that that animal is capable of spreading brucellosis either to other elk or cattle or anything else. It only means they're exposed. Unfortunately, as you're all very well aware, the continued existence of feed grounds is incredibly complex. I refer to it as the mash cat syndrome. No matter what you do, someone's going to squeal like a mash cat. So whether you say you're going to close the feed grounds, then you have the advocacy groups that want to keep them open, to keep separation from cattle and bison, and then you have the groups on the other hand who want to close the feed grounds because of disease issues. So it is truly a mash cat syndrome. And we know that if the feed grounds were eliminated today, brucellosis would not go away. Unfortunately, in our Cody and Meeteetse area, we have brucellosis that is maintained in the absence of feed grounds, and our seroprevalence is very similar to some of our feed ground populations. So how do we monitor brucellosis in our feed grounds as well as our free-ranging populations? This is a picture of the large trap that was put together for test and slaughter at Muddy Creek Feed Ground, and it's pretty simple in that elk are baited into the large traps that you see to your left. Elk are baited in there with hay. Once enough elk are in there, we simply remotely shut the door and then work those elk through the chutes, as you'll see in these next pictures. This isn't something that our shop does. We're more involved in the testing once the samples are collected. But this comes out of Brandon Scurlock's shop. They shoot to sample between 4 and 7 feed grounds per year, and we do that simply to monitor seroprevalence of brucellosis over time on those feed grounds. We also monitor both the Del Creek and the Grays River feed grounds, And we do that to keep an eye on our vaccine efficiency, because we do vaccinate elk with strain 19 on all but one of our feed grounds. And then, of course, opportunistic sampling. Whenever we have our hands on an elk, whether it be research or otherwise, we want a blood sample from it. So most of that occurs on the feed grounds, but it certainly occurs in other areas across the state. So as far as feed grounds are concerned, as I mentioned, that large trap that I showed a picture of earlier, this is an older trap, but the principle is the same. We simply run those elk down the trap. They fit in between each one of those little stations there, and then you can see I'm holding up one of those doors. As an elk comes in, then the door drops behind it and traps it in that location. Once it's in that little station, then we use a quite large needle, 14 gauge. We insert that into a jugular and then simply free catch that blood as it comes out of the hub of the needle into the tub. I know that sounds kind of brutal, but actually it's a pretty safe way to collect blood on an animal that's bouncing around like these elk, which are really not restrained at all. So once we get our blood, then it comes to our shop where we do a variety of tests before we call that animal positive or negative. And I threw this up just to give you an idea of what seroprevalence looks like on our feed grounds over time. And you can see it's very confusing. We don't have, like I mentioned with CWD, a nice flat line or a line going up or a line going down. Our lines go every direction they can. So we certainly see a lot of variation on each feed ground over time. And we see that, unfortunately, regardless of vaccination. At this point, we don't see that strain 19 vaccination is having a large effect on our seroprevalence over time. You can see that here. Grays River is shown in red. That's a feed ground that we have vaccinated and monitored for over a very long time period, much longer than shown on this chart. And then Dell Creek is a feed ground where we have not vaccinated. Again, you can see that over time. Anyway, the moral of this story is really that seroprevalence varies a lot over time. We certainly know that when we have a long winter, elk are on the feed grounds longer. They're there longer in the spring. Therefore, they're more likely to be exposed to an aborted fetus, and then we can expect to see a little higher seroprevalence in the coming years. That said, there's more to it than that. You could not take a snow depth chart and relay it over here and see a direct correlation. Again, just like CWD, we don't know a lot about brucellosis, and we don't know a lot about brucellosis in elk on our feed grounds. For as far as surveillance of brucellosis and hunter-killed elk, this is something that our laboratory accomplishes, and we're really monitoring brucellosis outside the feed grounds. So again, what we do is we send out somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 kits each year to hunters that were successful in drawing a cow tag in our target areas. And from the 10,000 kits that we send out, somewhere between 800 and 1,400 of those samples actually come back to the lab. I know that sounds pretty dismal, but it's not that bad. When you consider that 40% of elk hunters are successful, of those 40%, about half of them are going to remember to actually bring their kit to the elk and fill it up. And about half of those samples are actually suitable for testing once they come back to the laboratory. It's actually a very efficient way to sample a broad area, and actually it works quite well. We try and monitor those herd units that surround the feed grounds every year, but we also try and cover the entire state every 4 to 5 years. We've been doing this for a long time, over 22 years, and we've looked at over 11,000 samples during that time. It's a very successful program. We get tired of putting these together, but all in all, it is a successful program. And this is a blood kit that we send out to hunters. It's pretty straightforward. We simply ask that when a hunter harvests his animal, to please fill that tube up with blood, wrap the tube in a paper towel, put the paper towel in a bag, throw the bag in the box, put the business reply label on it, and please fill out our little data card, which is just hunt area, age, sex, location of kill, not where they shot the elk, but actually where they harvested the elk, and then send that back to us. As I mentioned, this is where we concentrate on almost every year. And again, we're monitoring the spread of brucellosis from our feed grounds outward. So we continually monitor those herd units. In addition, we also hit every other area across the state. Again, we're trying to get a good feel for where brucellosis occurs and where it doesn't. Well, unfortunately, in 2012, we found a new positive in the bighorns. That new positive really, well, got everybody pretty excited, you could say, because this is the first time that we've identified brucellosis outside of the GYA. This is pretty significant when you consider that brucellosis has stayed pretty well confined to the GYA for a very long time. And this is the first time we found it outside. So that really dictated how we're going to do our surveillance efforts over the next couple of years. And this is a map of where we surveyed this year. The vast majority of our efforts were applied to the bighorns. And we did really everything we could do to get as many samples as we could. And I'll have a few more slides on that later. But in addition, we also hit all those hunt areas, as you can see, that go down around the feed ground areas and up to our western border. In addition, we sampled the western slope of the Snowy Mountains or Snowy Range, and that was part of our statewide surveillance that we could do this year. Anyway, moving back to the bighorns, like I said, we did everything we could to collect as many samples as we could. We made it a focus of our field personnel to get as many samples. We also hired temporary field technicians, 2 in Cody and 2 in Sheridan, and their job, of course, was, again, to get as many samples as possible. We did a few things to increase our sample quality, so we had more usable samples in the laboratory. That was also a priority of the field technicians. We put coolers all over the bighorns. Again, our goal was to try and get those samples off the dash of the hunter's pickup and into our hands. Certainly we find that those blood samples are very fragile, and the sooner we can get them preserved, the more of them we get to save. So we also distributed field centrifuges across several points in Sheridan and Cody, where they could centrifuge that blood on site, and then they could freeze that serum and send it to the laboratory at their convenience. In addition, we did rapid diagnostic turnaround. This was at the request of the Wyoming Livestock Board. We used to batch our samples and test them only in, say, February or March. We changed that to where we are sampling or testing our samples once a week. So for 2014, we sent out just over 10,000 kits. We handed out just over 400 directly to hunters, and those were mostly at check stations, field contacts, etc. Again, just trying to put a face to the request of please give us blood from your elk. It made a big difference. All in all, we've got, and our surveillance is still continuing and will till the end of this month, but so far we've gotten almost 1,500 samples that have been returned to the lab. And of those, 70%, or just over 1,000, have been suitable for testing. So good on us, right? Normally we're about 50%. Now we're about almost 70% in usable samples. So that worked quite well. For the bighorns themselves, we got 892 out of the total that I just showed on the last slide. And of those, 72% have been suitable. And of the 72%, 572 are considered valuable as far as us in the laboratory. In other words, they're from adults or yearlings. Those are more valuable for surveying for brucellosis. Unfortunately, though, we did find brucellosis in 2 new hunt areas. Sometimes our surveillance is a little bit too good. We found it in Hunt Area 39, which is just north of Hunt Area 40, as well as Hunt Area 41, which is just south of Hunt Area 40. I've also got a little chart there that shows the number of samples that were collected from each hunt area in the bighorns, and you can see there's quite a variation from a high of 126 to a low of 5. So there's a lot of factors that go into how many samples you collect in an area, but all in all, it was very, very successful surveillance in the Bighorns. Here's a map of where all the positives have occurred in the Bighorns, and you can see they're really a pretty tight group. Most of them around 40. The new positive in Hunt Area 39 is just on the border. And then, of course, the new positive in Hunt Area 41 a little bit farther south. So this is my last slide on brucellosis, and it shows where we have brucellosis to date. It gives you a good feel. Most of it, of course, is in the northwestern corner, and we are continuing to survey for brucellosis, not just around the feed grounds, but all over the state. But to date, the only new cases we have are in the Bighorns in that Hunt Area 39, 40, and 41. Again, I covered a very complex subject in a very short amount of time, so I'm not sure I did justice to it. So if any of you have specific questions on things that I did not cover here today, then I'm happy to send you whatever information is needed. Otherwise,
Wake our president up.
Mr. President?
Yes.
She wants a question than I do.
Okay, and I don't really have a question, Hank. I just wanted to commend the department on what they've done for brucellosis surveillance in the Bighorn Mountains. Because when you talk about over 1,000 good samples out of almost 1,500, that compares, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but in 2012, when this was first discovered, I believe you had like 25
That's
good
correct.
samples
That's
to
correct.
use. So I just wanted everybody to realize, when you look at them sending out 10,000 sample kits, and then you see only 1,500, and you think, oh gosh, they're not having that great a success. Completely to the contrary. That is a huge improvement in three hunting seasons.
Yes,
So
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
President Claudette, Hank, I've got several questions. One is I'd like to return to that graph where you show the three feed grounds, particularly the muddy feed ground.
Is that percentage or actual number? That's my question.
I guess I'm going to look at that muddy feed ground. Is this 2010, 2012 area there where we was doing the test and removal?
That's correct.
So we brought it down from somewhere up around 35% down, and it's headed back up now. And then there's a little more of a question. You mentioned the cheese. I didn't quite hear that, but does sour milk kill the brucella?
No, sir.
It does not?
Not to my knowledge. I suppose if it got sour enough, it would. I'm not sure I've tested that or read any tests on that. But
The reason I asked that question, my mother was raised back when they had brucellosis, and they always soured the milk, and they drank it sour to prevent that. And then the cheese, could you explain that again to me? I didn't get all of that, I guess.
the cheese was a story that I was contacted by the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia. This was some time ago. And they had a report of a bunch of sick people in Texas that had gotten sick after consuming cheese they purchased at Walmart. So CDC suspected it was brucellosis and asked me if I'd culture that cheese for them. I did, and that cheese came back as infected with Brucella melitensis, which is more of a disease of sheep and goats as well as humans. In fact, that's how brucellosis was first described, was based on melitensis, because it was killing soldiers way back in the island of Malta. More information than you needed, but.
Okay. Thank you.
You think that there would be some federal inspection present for,
Yes.
right?
Or you'd think at least the buyer at Walmart would say, hey, maybe I'm not going to buy that from Mexico. Maybe that's a bad idea. So,
That's
yes,
where it came from?
it came from Mexico. Yes, this Walmart was very close to the border in Texas. So, yeah, that's where it originally came from.
Was it goat and sheep
It was a
cheese?
soft, yes, it was a soft goat cheese.
Moving right along.
Okay, anything else for Hank? Thanks, Hank. Excellent.
Good afternoon, Commissioner, President Clouda, Commissioners, Director Talbot. Agenda item next is the Game Bird Farm Survey, but before I start, I think Chief Nesbitt has some words to say.
So many of you have had an opportunity over the years to meet Mr. Steve Schaefer. Mr. Steve Schaefer notified us here about a couple months ago that he was going to finally retire from the agency after 38 years of service and move on to different activities. But I thought this would be a great opportunity today to say thanks to Steve. Really, our bird farm program as we know it today is completely built and shaped by Steve Schaefer and his leadership over the years, and the folks that the direction he's provided and the influence he's provided. He's been through these evaluations like we're going to talk about today. I think he told me this is probably his fourth one that he's been through. And so anyway, Steve Schaefer. Where is Steve? Come on up here, Steve. I just wanted to take an opportunity in front of the commission to recognize him. He's always a man of many words. I'm sure he wants to probably get a 15, 20 minutes speech or something. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. So moving on, PowerPoint. We're going to go over the 2014 Game Bird Farm Survey results. But before we do, I just want to give you guys an update. This is what Steve and his crew released this year for the hunting public in Wyoming. The Downer Bird Farm produced just over 17,000 birds and released those to the hunting public for their pheasant hunting opportunity. And the Sheridan Bird Farm produced 15,234 birds to the pheasant hunting public for a total of 32,433 birds, which is just short of the record number of birds. So if you look at that number of birds, that's a heck of an accomplishment and a heck of a resource for the pheasant hunting public of Wyoming. So getting into the actual survey, as you recall at the March commission meeting, the commission directed the department to go out and conduct a survey from sportsmen and garner their thoughts on the future of the Game Bird Farm program, including looking at additional funding mechanisms to help offset the increased costs of raising and releasing pheasants. So what we did over the summer, we worked on developing that survey and ended up with developing 24 questions. We used a Google survey format, which kind of just analyzes it automatically, and the cost to do the survey was minimal because it was an online survey and we developed ourselves. We did not have to use any type of outside company or entity to help develop this survey. Due to the way the survey was developed, that depending how you answered one question, you may or may not be asked to answer the next question or the next question. So as you see in the responses, not every person who answered the survey answered every question. It was mainly based on a online survey through the internet. We also made hard copy surveys made available to the public at public meetings. And then all those hard copy surveys were put into the online survey, so they're all captured in one spot. And the survey dates were September 25th to November 20th, 2015. Survey distribution, to make sure we've got a good sample of survey respondents, and I believe as directed by the Commission in March, is we mailed out 9,068 survey cards. of which just over 4,500 were mailed to all 2013 pheasant special management holders, permit holders. Then another 522 were mailed to a sampling of resident, non-resident deer, elk, and antelope license holders. Of those, as you see, we had 1,488 total responses. Of the special management permit holders for pheasants, 712 responded, and then a breakdown of the antelope, deer, and elk license who responded. And then there was just the random people who could get online and do the survey, and that was 535 people. This is what the survey card looked like, kind of explained what it's about, and on the bottom there was to be a survey code, and so we could track what that person was as a survey card holder, if it was a deer, elk, or antelope hunter, or a special management stamp holder. So public meetings, as part of our survey process, we made sure we held public meetings. And if you have never been to one of the bird farms and participated in a pheasant release, this is the birds coming out of the back of the truck being released into some of the habitat at the Springer area. So we held a series of 17 meetings in every region of the state. As you can see, as you can imagine, attendance was quite varied. But Laramie region held the record. They held 4 meetings and had 97 people total in attendance. In Jackson, my gosh, they had 1 person attend, so there is interest across the state. Pinedale has 2. So we made sure we did meetings in every region, and we picked the communities where we felt there'd be the most attendance and input. So the actual, any questions so far on leading up to how the survey was conducted, and now we'll get into the results. Okay, results. So these are just the questions that we asked, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Did you hunt pheasants within the last 5 years? 1,221 people said yes. 267 people said no. So that's just kind of basic question. And then depending on how you answered that, it would go on to how you would answer the next question. If yes, did you hunt pheasants that were raised and stocked by a Wyoming Game and Fish Department game bird farm by Game Bird Farm? And there's results. As you can see, 92% of the people hunted pheasants that were raised and released by the Game Bird Farm program. And then this area on the box on my left, your left as well, those are the areas where those birds were released and hunted. If yes, how would you describe the quality of pheasants raised and stocked by the department's Game Bird Farm program? Again, 61% excellent, 33% good. So if you look at those 2 categories, 94% of the people feel that the quality of pheasants raised by the department are in the excellent or good category. Again, very positive note for the bird farm program. If yes, how would you describe the quantity of pheasants raised and stocked by the department's Game Bird Farm program? Again, like all the previous answers, very high on the positive side. Good, 45%, excellent, 35%. There's 90% or 80% of the survey in that category. 17% fair, 3% poor. And again, there's just some pictures on the left of getting birds ready to stock into the field. If yes, what areas did you hunt department-raised pheasants? This is the breakdown of where people hunt department-raised pheasants, whether it's a department habitat management area, Glendo, or a walk-in area, or state land in Johnson and Sheridan counties, where you see people hunt quite a few of the areas and are very interested in hunting. So I guess here's the big question. Do you support the department raising and releasing pheasants for hunting? 94% of the people say yes. A breakdown of that even further is that the big game license respondents, those who had an antelope license, 62 people said yes. 8 said no. Deer license respondents, 72 yes. No was 15. Elk license, 69, and 15 said no. So it even shows those people that have a big game license still support the department raising and releasing pheasants. So now we get into the funding. Would you need to pay more for the required special management permit if that income was used specifically to offset the department's Game Bird Farm expenses? Then we just said the current special management stamp is $12, and excluding the 50-cent license fee. Again, 92% of the people said yes. A breakdown of the big game hunters that were responded, support just from the big game hunters as well of increasing the fees. Again, how much would you be willing to pay for that permit? Breakdown, pretty much the cost that people would support is kind of equally distributed, so we could go up to approximately $50 or more, but most people think probably somewhere between that $15 to $20 range would be acceptable. Now we asked if they participated in the Springer Special Hunt within the past 5 years. 61% of the people said yes, and 39% of people said no, and our numbers of those charts are back to Peggy Story.
Yeah.
So, but that the percentage is correct. If yes, how many years in the past 5 years you could participate in Springer Special Hunting season? As you see, a lot of people, it's a tradition. 50% of the people have participated at least the last 5 years. Very, very popular program for hunters, especially youth and our older group of hunters.
How many humans are you talking about there? How many people?
What was that, Commissioner?
How many people, Scott? It's, you've got percentages.
It's the pie chart.
282 people have hunted Springer that responded to this question over the last 5 years.
Is that what we think is hunted at Springer in the last? It's been more.
No, these are the people that actually were responded.
Responded.
That responded. This is not actual people. This is those who responded to the survey.
Gotcha.
And then the question, would you be willing to pay an extra fee in addition to the special management stamp to hunt the Springer special hunting season? 57% of the people said no, 43% of the people said yes, so we support for additional funding there as well.
I think that's, you got that backward.
But go around, have those all fit.
57% yes?
Yeah.
57%, did I say it backwards?
Yeah.
Oh,
You said it backwards,
You
but
said
your
it
chart
backwards.
is
okay, I'm
correct.
sorry. Try to dodge people's heads and stuff. 57% support that, 43% do not support it. I'm sorry for the miscommunication. Again, if you support fee for Springer, how much you'd be willing to pay? Again, the graph, $5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 16 or more. Again, somewhere between probably $10 and $16 or more is what people would be willing to pay if we were to charge for a fee to hunt just Springer in addition to the special management stamp. So at Springer, there's a limit of 3 pheasants for the season. The question comes up, well, if I could buy a second management stamp, could I get a second limit? So we asked that question. So 61% of people said if I could, if I had to buy a second special management stamp and get a second limit of season pheasants, I would do that. So again, people are interested if I can increase my bag and pay more, I'd be willing to do that as well. And then the question was brought up in March, we should ask about a statewide season limit outside of Springer. And so we asked, do you support the department implementing a statewide season limit for any hunter who harvests this department raise and release pheasants? 53% of people said yes, 47% of people say no. That's obviously fairly close. A lot of comments that came in on that was, how do we enforce that? And so that was just some of the comments. And then if yes, how many pheasants do you feel the season limit should be? Again, most of them feel 6 to 9, 10 to 12, somewhere in that limit is pretty much the majority, maybe even up to 13 or 15. But once you start getting above 16 and above, most people don't support that if we were to go down that route. So then again, we asked this follow-up question to that, would you support allowing a person to take a second season limit if they're required to purchase a second pheasant management stamp? 62% of the people say yes, 38% of the people say no. So, if I pay more, maybe I should be able to get more. And then would you support any of the following in an effort to reduce game farm program costs? So 89% of the people don't support closing either of the game bird farm programs. 6% of the people say close both. 2% of the people close Downer, and 3% of the people say close Sheridan. So again, just like that other slide, there's a huge support for the game bird farm program, and we do not want to see either of them close. To further break that down, those that are antelope, deer, and elk hunters, their responses are at the bottom to those specific questions. So it shows then that deer, elk, and antelope hunters also support maintaining the bird farms as is. And then, how much do you feel the pheasants raised and released by the Department of Game Bird Farms contribute to your ability to hunt pheasants in Wyoming? 77% of the people say significant, 13% moderately, add those two. 90% of the people feel that the game bird farms raised and released by the Game Bird Farm program contribute to their ability to hunt pheasants. That's huge. I think if you look, if we didn't have that, how limited the pheasant hunting would be in Wyoming. And then we just kind of did a license breakdown over the past 5 years. Which type of Wyoming hunting license have you purchased or applied for? Just a breakdown of that, so it's kind of a variety of people who were respondents. Obviously, some people had multiple licenses. Here's the age demographics of who responded. See, 51 to 60, 61 to 70 is 50% of the surveys, so that shows there'll be a variety of the group of the people who are hunting pheasants, or game bird farm pheasants. And then people who responded, residents that responded to the survey. And we did have some non-residents because they were in the random sample of the deer, elk, and antelope hunters, as well as some non-residents purchased a special management stamp in Hunt, Springer, and some other areas. So kind of interesting. You look at Goshen County, 3%, Fremont County, 8%, Sweetwater County, 3%, Sheridan, 9%, Detrona, 12%. So it's quite a variety of respondents. So there was, like Goshen County, where the Downer bird farm is, only 3% of the people from there responded. But yet we had, if you look at the survey results and manipulate that out, you show their support across the state for the program. So then we had, the last question was, we allowed comments and thoughts on Game Bird Farm, the Game Bird Farm program, and associated put and take pheasant hunting opportunities. We received 197 additional comments, 36 Game Bird Farm or other wildlife department related topics. The majority of the comments support the Game Bird Farm program. Increased fees, good way to retain and recruit hunters of all ages. And the comments are all over the board. I've got some examples here if you'd like to hear some of the other categories, but the majority of them were those 3 or 4 that are in that last bullet. Received public comment. This is from the Goshen County Chamber of Commerce, and just adding their support for the bird farm program, especially the bird farm at Downer. So, let me go back. And here's a video that from one of the public meetings. These 2 gentlemen attended the public meeting, I believe, in Laramie, and this is kind of their comment to the program.
I'm Bill McClary, and I've been hunting at Springer since 1983. Jack here was the first time that I went out there. Jack took us there in 83. We've actually been going there on and off. Jack and I have been hunting together ever since on the Springer. We've had a lot of good times. We take our dogs out there. I'm actually on my fifth yellow lab, and it's all about getting the dogs out there. I've taken my daughter there and my wife to Springer. So my daughter shot her first pheasant on Springer. And it's just been part of a family tradition to go there. I have to thank Jack for getting me interested in pheasant hunting in Wyoming.
When I first met Bill, we kind of met through when we were working, and we got to talking one day, and I asked him if he hunted pheasants. He goes, yeah, I don't know where to go. There's no pheasants around Laramie. And I said, well, I know a place to go. It's, about 100 and some miles. So we made a date and decided to go to Springer, and that's where I took him. And like he was saying, I think I'm on my 4th or 5th dog also since going on Springer. Had a lot of good times with Bill. We've done some elk hunting, and it seems like the pheasant hunt is always more fun. And never heard of a guy hurting his back packing out pheasants, so I'd rather do that than go elk hunting sometimes. But it's a great program. Support it 100%. I've taken all my kids there. My son and I were there 2 weekends ago, and a weekend ago, and just have a good time. I mean, it's always fun. Never had a bad day there, whether it's cold sunny. I've been in storms. I've had some rides across Highway 85 there that we probably shouldn't have been on the road, but we were heading to Springer. So
I'm maxing out here and
Meeting, I believe it was Laramie and their thoughts on the bird farm program. As you can see by their comments, they're very passionate about pheasant hunting and what the bird farm program provides and their ability to maintain that tradition with their kids and grandkids and their friends from work. So before I take any questions, I guess it's a recommendation, or it is a recommendation of the department that the commission maintain the game bird farm program with the understanding that we commit to looking at running that program as most effective and as efficient as possible. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for Brian?
Or Scott.
Or Scott, I'm sorry.
And Steve's here as well to answer anything that I can't.
I'd like to start a dialogue here because I don't, I guess I'm the one responsible for bringing this up. I'm going to do the budget issues, something that we look at. I'm not surprised at the response you got. You asked the right questions, that's the response we all knew we would get. The question is, how do you pay for it? And I saw a lot of information there, a lot of public support for bird farm. That doesn't surprise me in the least. I got those calls too. The question is, long term, are we going to suggest to the legislature that fee for those tax, for those licenses, needs to go up to cover at least a portion of the cost of bird farms? Because right now, we're covering, I think the last math that I did, we're covering about 10% of the cost of raising a pheasant in the state of Wyoming, by the state, and recovering fees from folks that use that research. And that, to me, I've always found that unacceptable. So I'd like to see not focus on the question. We knew we were going to get that response. That is the right response from the public. The question still that we haven't answered is how do we pay for it? How do we at least cover the majority or some portion of that cost? It's a big, in my way of thinking from a business perspective, it's a big gimme right now that the users are not paying near the cost of that program.
Well, I'll chime in here. It looked to me like they had given us a little bit of direction on what they were willing to pay up to, and so we have a figure floating out there. It's too late to do anything this year. A budget year, even if we found somebody to introduce it through TRW, whether we could get it out and do anything next year is just a crapshoot. And then for sure in 2017 would be as soon as another full session of the legislature gathers up to consider a fee increase. But I think we have the figures. I mean, you're right, Aaron. We did ask they asked the right questions. And I think it's just a matter now of the timing is to take this to TRW and start the dialogue with them on getting something before the legislature in the upcoming session, not this one obviously, to increase the fees somewhere in that area where they were comfortable with. I mean, I guess that's where we need to go. I don't think there's anything we can do probably today, but I think in the future, I think it's the intention of the department to take this through TRW, through the legislature, to raise those management stamps. Am I right?
Mr. President, members of the commission, I guess just a little additional background. At this point, the special management stamps, whether they be for the bird farm or the feed ground, are established under Wyoming statute. When we went through the funding process in the last couple of years, one of the suggestions that came from the public was to not only increase those, but to allow the commission the authority to set the price of those stamps. And recall that the only other fee, if you will, that the commission sets is that on doe fawn, deer, and antelope, and cow-calf elk licenses. The commission currently has the statutory authority to set those fees. And I think that clearly there were some suggestions that came out of the funding process that suggested that we do that. And with commission support, I think that one of the options would be to suggest to TRW to look at that as an interim topic, either to increase the cost of those through legislation or to perhaps explore allowing the commission the opportunity to set those through commission rule and regulation. And next year would be a budget session, and this would be a revenue generating bill.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
it would be,
We wouldn't have to wait till
we would
2000.
not have to wait.
You're right. Silly me.
Well, and Mr. President, if I might chime in, I think it would be rather important to address it as soon as possible, because obviously we've been dealing on the budget situation now for a couple years very carefully, not that you weren't dealing with it before, and also this data is collected now and fresh and timely. And so, because I think Commissioner Clark makes a very important point, I think the economics of running these is of concern not only to the department, but it has been presented to us by the public. Yet when you ask, and I expected the same thing, percentages too, they really support it. And if they are willing to pay for it, you guys have gone to all this work, and that's considerable work by the regions, by the way, to hold those public meetings and put that together. It would be good because you have this data in place, so that when you're talking to TRW, you're able to say, and look, they're willing to pay for it. So I would say it needs, timely. Let's get after it.
Well, no, I think that's the plan. An interim topic. Commissioner Price.
In these presentations, did you make the public aware of the large disparity of the cost of those bird farms versus what the return was?
Commissioner President Cloud, Commissioner Price, Director Talbot, yes, we started out with an introductory video that kind of outlined the game bird farm program, the budget, the cost per bird, and other miscellaneous status. It was about a 7-minute video that we started out the meetings with, so that information was provided.
How was that received?
I think pretty good. I think a lot of people learned a lot about the program, but I think that was a real eye-opener. It gave them a good basic background understanding of the bird farm program.
Going back to Aaron's numbers, it was about 10 to 1. I think something like 60,000 we got. It cost us 660,000 to raise the birds. That's a big disparity. Yet the numbers that they were willing to increase, say, well, we'll give you $5, $10, maybe 15. That's not going to come close to the covering the cost or even reaching much of it. So I think if you go to people, basically, if you look at it, this is a government program. People are always willing to take a program like that and live it up. When it comes to paying for it, they're less excited about it. And so I think they need to fully understand what this is costing them.
Mr. President, and to address some of these things that have come up, there's a couple points that I just want to add to some of the components that went into the department's recommendation. And firstly, and we've talked about this before, but realistically, most of our programs, if you look at our moose program, moose management, if you look at bighorn sheep, you even look at turkeys. We haven't done that, but I would assure you that for the most part, if you look at it by individual species, really deer, elk, and antelope are probably the only species that continually, year after year, pay for themselves, and actually those other programs are paid for by the excess revenues that are generated from those species. And then additionally, another thing that the department considered when we made this recommendation is some kind of intangibles of the bird farm program, and that is, hunter recruitment, and the fact that many young hunters get their start with pheasant hunting, and without this program, there are decreased opportunities certainly across the state. Wyoming is not a state that has a lot of native upland game bird type habitat, so I just want to make sure that's part of the discussion.
And additionally, though, Steve and his crew also provide assistance to our habitat and access maintenance on stuff around the bird farm, Springer, Table Mountain, and stuff. So, we get multiple use out of those guys.
President Cloud, we said you had a recommendation. You give us a bunch of facts, but do you have any recommendations? How many of those management stamps do you sell at $12.50 a year?
I believe it's like 5,100 and some change. So I believe it's I've got that. I
So
can
5,000.
Yeah, 5,000. It's about
So
it's about
vehicle.
$58,000 a year. Yeah. That's excluding obviously
So you double
bird
it.
licenses.
What I'm with, we're hot on the trail to get this done. Now we're going to get all this stuff, but we're not going to. I think that's where Aaron's coming from. And I kind of agree. I mean, let's give us some recommendations, and let's, the legislature's got to set the price. But let's get some, give us some options of what you think. If you got to pay every time you go, or one, or whatever.
In 2013, we sold 5,153 special management stamps for $61,836. That was, I don't have the 14 stuff, but that was 13, and it's been fairly consistent.
So that gives you the right to go out there as many times as you want.
That you can hunt game bird farm pheasants with the possession of a stamp. You can harvest as many as you want, but on specifically to Springer, you can only take 3 birds. But basically, you can take as many pheasants as you want within this current regulation on possession and bag limits.
Mr. President, now, but if you buy a pheasant special management stamp, you also have to have a resident game bird license for
That's correct.
$16.
That's
Plus,
correct.
you have to have a conservation stamp.
That's correct.
Now, certainly, some of those people already have conservation stamps. Some of those people also probably have a game bird license already. But a high percentage of those, we can assume, are people that those were purchased for the purpose of hunting pheasants. So our numbers are a little bit skewed here. We need to do some more math. It's not quite as bad as what it looks if you only take into account the special pheasant management stamp.
So if they buy the bird stamp as well, then it's, instead of 10 to 1, it's 5 to 1. I mean,
Right.
it's still very disproportionate. And I don't know what the number is, but I think what I'd like to make a motion to the council, for the commission to consider, and that is that the department develop a strategy to go to TRW and get TRW to consider as an interim topic based on the information you've collected, the support for the program, and the amount of money people are willing to spend for additional. I like the idea, if I can get another set of birds out of Springer, I can buy another license and pay for it. I think that gets to the question of some of the public saying there's guys out there shooting 40 or 50 pheasants a year on a $12, on a $12 license. I think if you guys could develop a strategy to take the TRW and say, look, here's how we want to approach this. Here's what it costs. Here's what people are currently put in. We have a discrepancy. We're trying to be a good government. We want to bring these two things closer together so users are paying for the resources that they're provided. And I like the idea that Scott brought up. The first thing we should pitch is that the commission gets to set the price of that based on our costs. And if not, then the TRW needs to address it through statute. So I'd like to make that motion more as a formal motion to maybe not have any weaviness in terms of direction for you guys on what we were hoping to accomplish here, at least what I was hoping to accomplish.
I'd be glad to second that motion.
Okay. Anyone from the audience want to? Sam, would you come up, please?
How many pheasants you shoot? Christ.
Yeah, boy, so
Yeah.
down there. President Clotter and Director Talbot, Commissioners, the dollars, budget, and all the rest are definitely, this is a business. Commissioner Clark's absolutely right. The dollars in something that are the wide variance in this, but my business, we take the first-time youth hunter free. And it's grandpas bring the grandkids, dads, the rest. As long as the adult pays, we take the child for nothing. And we've done this for years. Reason. Gene did a count on how many big game hunters hunt in the state. And when she brought it back to us at our meeting, there wasn't anybody in there that said that was below 30%. Everybody was 30, 40. You know, Wyoming, everybody hunts. 11%.
11% of what?
11% of this state hunts big game. I mean, you want to talk about budget, the support. I mean, there's a problem. So non-residents absolutely become a huge issue to us to stabilize, you know. But to go back to what I'm talking about, youth, these little buggers running around with that crap in their hand and punching buttons all the time, won't get off the butt. We need to get them in the field, either big game hunting, but this bird hunting is huge because it's easy. The kids get a lot of fun, and they can go out. It's short time. You know, it's not this blizzards and dragging them horseback and all the other stuff. I mean, it's a chance to open the door. This commission and this Game and Fish goal is the future, and these kids are our future. And I understand the dollars and the rest, but you can't put dollars on something like this if we can get more and more kids into the field. That should be the goal. And in closing, there's an interesting thing. In Vietnam, where we were in dense cover all the time, 90% of the body bags I zipped up never hunted. So if you're going to keep your damn kid alive, get him hunting. That's it.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any other comments? With that, we'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
In closing, I'd like to say, Commissioners, thank you. And I'd like to thank Steve Schaefer and his Game Bird Farm crew, other regions, B, and David Ellsworth, who were absolutely very, very helpful. I would have been lost without their help on getting this survey developed, and then the PowerPoint, and then all the regions with their assistance in doing this thing. It was truly a group effort. So I'm just the guy that presented it, but the actual work goes out to the field people. So I want to say thanks to them.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
And Steve, we want to thank you for all your hard work, and the way you run those bird farms is a model for everybody in the country. And you know, you're like a lot of guys around here, underappreciated, but thank you very much for all your years of service and a world-class program. Thank you.
well said. Okay. Let's take a break for about 12 minutes. We'll get back here at 3:25, and we'll be about right on.
Good call, Mr. Work his ass off. It feels it's his
Well, I will. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the commission, and Director Talbot. My presentation here will just be a pretty brief update on where we stand after 1 year of our 3-year cycle on specifically the Grays River group of hunt areas that we talked about last year at our commission meeting this time when we had our season setting. So at that meeting, we discussed different seasons. There we go. Mortality limits for different areas in the state, and these specific areas here in the red are in the Grays River Bear Management Unit 102, hunt areas 14 through 17 and 30, and that specific group has its own mortality limit. And at this commission meeting last year, the changes you see here in red are where our previous mortality limits were, and then the increases are the black numbers right there on the right. So specifically what we're going to probably focus on here most is this limit of 30 in the spring, which was an increase, and it was the major impetus for this increase was concerns over mule deer mortality due to black bear predation and the potential of impacts to the mule deer population. And so that limit was increased to 30 with the directive that we come back in a year and report on what's going on. And so that's what this presentation will be here today. And what I'll do, there's a bit of a modification from this presentation. I've moved a few slides around, so the slides in your packet may not follow directly. They're all the same slides, but I decided what we should do is just start with some of the numbers first and show everyone where things have gone after that first year. And then after that, I have a few slides on what it all means, just as far as black bear ecology, dispersal and reproduction, and what these numbers may mean to the black bear population in the Grays River area. So first off, we'll just start with some numbers right off. And so we did reach that spring female mortality limit, and that means we got 30 females. We hit it just 1 day early. The season closes on June 15th normally. We hit 30 females on the 14th of June. And in addition to those 30 females, 36 males were harvested, so 66 black bears total in those areas. And then in the fall, that mortality limit of 18 was not reached. We had 9 females and 15 males total. And so the season went to the fullest extent October 31st in the fall this past year. If you look at the total numbers then compared to the last several season setting cycles, you'll notice these blocks here with the black lines, these 3-year blocks, 2008 through 2010 and then 11 through 13 are the previous 2 cycles, 3-year season cycles. And so you can see those 2 blocks had lower mortality quotas, and then the resulting numbers of males and females in each of those years. You'll see 2014 we had 90 total bears, so that is a record for these Grays River areas. We've never reached any more than 82 in previous years. 51, the male harvest of 51 was an increase of 42% from 2013, and that is about 17% higher than that previous 6-year average on those other 2-year or other season cycles. And then for the females, that harvest increased or decreased actually just by 1 bear, so 2%. But that 39 for a total was still 19% higher than the previous 6-year average. If you look at it graphically, just to show a longer-term trend, you can see that the 2014 number slightly higher than we've seen in the past. 90 bears, 1 fewer female total, but overall you can see that trend of females kind of increasing from about 2003 or 4 until present time. We've got probably 20 more females being taken from these areas than we have had in about 10 years ago. So, and if you break that down, just to this graphic here shows you the spring numbers. And these spring numbers, there's a lot more variability you can see. And that's one of the main issues with this area in the Grays River, is that so much of the harvest is dictated by snowpack in the spring and how quickly it melts or doesn't melt. In years where we have a lot of snow and it persists for a long time, some of these areas you can't even access to hunt until June. And so that makes it very difficult. And so you can see, like 2007, for example, this year, we had very low harvest, and that was a year where things just extended into the spring season quite a bit. But overall, this shows the same trend, that increase over time, and 2014 again was the highest for both totals and for females, of course, because we'd never had a mortality limit as high as 30 until this year. And we hit that again on June 14th. So then we'll get into the numbers just a little bit more in depth to talk about the harvest criteria. And I think we discussed this last year during our season setting, but just a refresher of the harvest criteria, what they mean. We have 3 main criteria, and they kind of work in a progression from first to second to third, and they're all based on the vulnerability of different sex and age classes of bears to bear harvest. And so they should be viewed as a composite. You can't view criterion 3 independent of 2 and 1. You need to look at them all and kind of see where we're standing as a population whole. So first off, we'll start with harvest criterion 1. And this, again, is just for the Grays River hunt areas 14 through 17 and area 30. So just those red highlighted areas only. And the dashed line is the annual number. And then that dark black line is kind of what we go off of. And that's a 3-year smooth average. And so it kind of smooths out some of those real big bumps that you can get when you have 1 year with the different environmental conditions or something like that. So the first criterion then is percent adult males in the harvest, and the idea then is that a high percent of adult males in the harvest is equivalent to a population that's doing really well. It's a robust population, and that's based on the vulnerability of harvest. Males tend to be the boldest acting of the bears. They move a lot, makes them more vulnerable to harvest than females would, and adult males tend to be the ones that are dominant and will secure areas and food sources such as baits and things like that. So what you would look for in a population that's doing really well is a high percentage of adult males. And what you'll see then in this Grays River area is that percent of adult males has declined steadily since about the mid or early 2000s, and come down from that stable range in the middle there to where we're now looking at around 15% on average of the male harvest is adult males, or the total harvest is adult males, I'm sorry. So indicating that we're not seeing a whole lot of big males that are coming out of this area anymore. Not as many as there used to be anyway, for sure. And there we go. Second criterion then would be the percent of females in the total harvest. And harvesting females, of course, especially with bears, has a pretty dramatic impact on the population. They're the reproductive segment. Bears don't reproduce very quickly. It takes them until 5 before they even have their first litter, and then after that it's only every 2 years for black bears. And so it takes a while for a population to bounce back from real sharp declines. And so monitoring that female cohort is pretty important. And so if you look at this one, you'll see right around 2010 or so we moved into that what you would call the reduction range for percent of females in the harvest, over 40% starting around 2010 or 11. And it's kind of stayed up there. You'll notice that dash line dropped this year. We actually saw a little bit lower percent of females in the harvest this past year, 2014, than we did in 2013. So there's still a little bit of variability, but we're still in that area of 45-50% or so of the harvest, of the total harvest, is females.
Dan, could you go back one slide?
Sure. Maybe. There we go.
What years that we went into reduction on the males?
We would
2002?
two-ish, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point, actually. Thank you. Usually what we'll see is this progression from 1 to 2 to 3 in these criteria. And so the first one you'll notice is that if we're starting to impact the population, you'll notice fewer adult males in the harvest. And then as you move past that, you'll start to notice more females in the harvest. And so that's what we're starting, seeing around 2011. We're starting to move into that area for the Grays River.
Mr. President, what's an adult male? How old is a?
We consider anything 5 and over for males or females to be an adult. We consider 5-year-old females because that's when they first reproduce. Males generally could reproduce at 4 or so, but because of the dominance thing and males excluding other males from breeding, usually it's around 5 or so when they consider them adult. That's usually a prime age bear.
So when you're creating your data, are you counting all males and all females or just adults?
For this particular harvest criterion right here, it's all males and all females, subadults and adults. And then the third one would be the percent of adults in the female harvest. So the least vulnerable of the bear cohorts would be adult females for a couple reasons. One, because if they have cubs at side, it's illegal to kill a female. And also because even when they're not with cubs at side, they don't move as much and they're not as dominant, and so they tend to make themselves less vulnerable to harvest just by their behavior. And so adult females have an established home range, they're pretty small, they stay close to home. Those kind of things limit their vulnerability. And so if we start to see increase in the percent of adult females in the female harvest, then that's when we start to worry, because the adult female cohort is definitely the most important for reproduction and maintaining a population. And so right now what it's looking like in the Grays River, it's pretty stable. We, right around 40% adult females, lots of variation, of course, because we don't take as many adult females because they are less vulnerable. So one year we may take 2 or 3 more, and that really increases, percentage-wise, increases what it looks like. But overall, it's pretty stable. So as of now, the last 2 years, if you look at this dashed line, we have seen that increase moving up toward what we would consider a stable zone for adult females. We'll see in the next couple of years of this cycle what that transpires. And so now we've got the numbers, and what I'd like to do in the next few slides here is just try to put some context into what does this mean. So what, we've got adult females, adult males, more or less taken, but describe a little bit about some biology and black bear ecology and how they move and how they respond to harvest, and what all of this could mean for what we're going to see in the Grays River in the next few years.
Before you go on,
Sure.
In real terms, between 2013 and 2014, how many bears are you talking about there? Is that 2, 4,
Well,
8,
yeah, and
9?
that's exactly the point.
Is that just a real small number?
It's because it's adult females that we're looking at in the female harvest. For instance, in 2014, we had 30 females taken in the spring and only 9 in the fall. So out of 39 females, then what percent of those females, the 39,
make up that
were adults? And so 40% or so were adult females. So you're looking at around 16 bears.
So the difference between 13 and 14 in absolute numbers of bears is what? 6?
Yeah, you'd be looking at somewhere around 5, 6 bears, 5, 6 adult females increase.
So we're drawing some lines on some very small numbers of changes in actual bear harvest.
For this criterion, yes.
Okay.
We're looking at 5, probably. Okay. 5 or 6 bears, more females in in that area. So there we go. So here we have a hypothetical female black bear, and she's 5 years old. She's reached reproductive age, and she's going to have a litter of cubs this year. And so when she does have those cubs, she'll, she could have a male and a female cub here that we've got, the male in blue and the female in red, and she'll raise them through a year, and then the next year, after they come out of the den as yearlings, she'll kick those cubs off, she'll breed again, and then the next year she'll have another litter of cubs. And so it's a 2-year cycle of reproduction. But when she kicks those cubs off and they disperse, they don't just disperse randomly or in some sort of pattern. It's the females tend to stay really close to home. They'll have a home range that they basically establish right on top of or just adjoining their mother's home range. And they stay very close, and it really doesn't matter what the densities are of the bear population around them. They'll still stay real close to home. The males, they'll take off, and it's usually, they're looking for an open home range where there's not another adult male that'll run them off. And so they try to find a vacant place to set up shop, and so they can go a long ways. And so after she's had a litter and she's kicked them off, she'll have another litter, and over the years what it looks like is something like this, where she's got her home range and all of her female cubs kind of centered around her, but her male cubs have dispersed to all different areas around. And so what it could look like then on the landscape, if you've got an area, here's our hypothetical black bear population in the Grays River area, and what we've got in this situation is we've got an area like up here around Jackson. The Jackson Bear Management Unit, we know is got pretty light black bear harvest due to several reasons. One, we don't have the ability to bait there because of grizzly bear recovery zone regulations. We have a lot of access issues because of national parks, wilderness areas, snow conditions. All of that leads to a pretty light harvest in the Jackson Bear Management Unit. We know we get some pretty decent harvest over here in Idaho and that adjacent area. Down in the southern end of the Wyoming range, it's not quite as extensive as it is in that Grays River area. So we've got areas where the population's harvested, but not quite as heavily as it would be harvested in a place like the Grays River potentially. And so if you look at this and then you say, okay, we'll take some bears out of that population during the hunting season, and so now you've got a bunch of vacancies left in a home range, or left in areas where there are no bears with established home ranges anymore. And then what you'll have is a lot of these subadult males that have been born in areas adjacent to that will then come down in and establish home ranges in that Grays River area and set up shop. And over time, given enough intensive hunting pressure, you start to see this show up in the percent of subadult males that you're seeing in the harvest. And so that could affect harvest quality overall. Bear hunters that want to come in there and take big adult males are going to probably start to see this more and more difficult as they see fewer and fewer big males in the area. And so what we've got are some data that we've got from a couple of bear management units in the state, the Jackson and the Absaroka Bear Management Units, where we know, because of reasons I just said before, the grizzly bear recovery zone, the access issues, wilderness areas, national parks, we know these areas have pretty light harvest. And then we'll compare those to the Grays River Bear Management Unit. And so what you see is here the Absaroka Bear Management Unit, that trend line going downward, you're about 40% of the male harvest is subadults. And a similar trend with the Jackson Bear Management Unit, going down to around 40-50% of that male harvest is subadults. And then we'll look at the Grays River in the last 20 years or so, and you'll see that we're up to about 80% of the male harvest right now in the Grays River Bear Management Unit is subadult males. And so and there's quite a bit of pressure in this area. So if there were a lot of big males in there, we'd probably be seeing some of those males coming out, and we see mostly in the male harvest a lot of subadults, and that trend could be due to what we saw before, which is the subadult males moving in from areas that have lighter harvest pressure and setting up home ranges in the Grays River area and the Wyoming range itself. So in summary, what we're seeing here is a high proportion of subadult males in the male harvest. This could affect quality of harvest over time, and that is an issue that a lot of real dedicated bear hunters have some problems with. They would really like to see access to big adult males. Overall, the harvest criteria just from this 2014, the first year of our 3-year cycle, is very similar to what we've seen in the past. We've got a low percentage of adult males in the harvest, a relatively high percentage of females. It did blip downward just a little bit this year, so we'll see what the next 2 years bring. And then adult female percent has increased in the last 2 years or so, but generally still pretty stable at around 40%, so we haven't seen a huge change. So the remaining 2 years of this 3-year cycle will provide us a lot more insight on what's going on and the effects of the increased harvest on the black bear population. But then as an aside, in the interim 1 year since we talked about this last January, the University of Wyoming Co-op unit, who's been working on a mule deer project in the Wyoming range, will begin this spring and then continue in the spring of 2016 as well, study on the causes of mortality of newborn fawn mule deer in the Wyoming range. And so what the plan is this spring to go out and mark with expandable radio collars these newborn fawns, and then go find the fawns that have died and try to figure out what the cause of the mortality is on all these fawns. And so that will give us a lot more information on specifically the black bear's role in mortality as well as predation in general and other causes that may be occurring out there. And so actually this cycle of the higher mortality limits for this past year and then the coming 2 years will work out actually quite well, because we'll have coincident data on the next 2 years of what could be the response of increased mortality limits on black bears and what that might do to predation on mule deer fawns. And so I think it would be important to make sure that we can maintain consistency in our data here and just allow for the research project to kind of determine what the effects of black bear predation on mule deers may be through their study there. And I believe that is all. So, questions?
Questions for Dan?
President Clowney, I have a comment. I appreciate what you've done there, Dan, and the things. And I had some questions, and you've answered all the questions I had. So
excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Price.
That's a good sign, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Okay, Mr. President, I'm Dan. I have a question, and I think I just probably need clarification. So when you're talking about that you're looking at the Grays River area, and you said your comment, I believe, was we think we're seeing more sub-adult males coming into the area out of areas that have less pressure. Is that how I understood you?
Right.
And you meant hunting pressure.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that what you meant? So, you're surmising that they're coming into the Grays River area where there is more hunting pressure, and you think that they're coming in there because there are less adult males, and that's opening up spots for the sub-adult males to come in?
Yeah. Yeah,
so while there's more hunting pressure there, there's less bear pressure. Is that what you're trying to say?
And bears are pretty sensitive to population density. They're not necessarily territorial, but they do look for places, especially a sub-adult male is going to look for a place where there's not a bunch of big adult males that'll run it around and it has access to food resources without disturbance. And so, what we'll see, our spring season comes through, we'll have bear harvest, we'll take out some adult males, and about that same time is when a lot of these sub-adult males are being kicked off as yearlings or maybe 2-year-olds that are moving out and trying to find new places. And so through the summer season, they move into these areas and find places where there are no other bears around or there's a lower density of bears, and they'll just set up a shop right there.
So while there, you talked about, concern about the quality of the adult males available, it does show success in terms of getting into that bear population a little bit to salvage some of the other species that we had concerns about as these bear populations were growing.
Yes.
So, there's two ways to look at that, because the plan in a lot of ways was to achieve some success in keeping deer and elk alive.
Yes, exactly. And there are the two perspectives that from the black bear hunter perspective, who wants to see larger adult males, versus the people who are concerned with mule deer and the fawn predation. And so that's why, yes, I mentioned that this is a really actually perfect time to be looking at the causes of mortality on these mule deer fawns right now, because of this co-op unit project that they're going to start this spring.
Thank you so much.
Mr. President, Dan, you say it's a perfect time, yet I remember a year ago when we reviewed these objectives, this bear population was already on a downward trend. And then this commission increased the harvest quota. So 2 more years of that, or 3 years of that increased harvest quota, is going to result in an unusually low number, or low bear population. Unusually low bear harvest of any wildlife, deer or elk. Why is that a perfect time to do that study? It seems to me like it's a poor time to do that study, because we're going to have results that are somewhat skewed by what we've done with the bears.
Well, Commissioner Culver, yes, I think that right now is probably, last year would have been perfect, but we didn't have that opportunity last year. This year is pretty close, because I don't believe that there will be enough of an immediate impact that we won't still see predation effects, if they're really there, in this spring season here in 2015, and then having one more year after that of increased harvest on black bears and neonate mortality study on mule deer fawns will give us that a little bit of an additional information on the impacts of the harvest when we have 2 consecutive years of study of both. You're correct in that it would have been great to have a pre-hunt study on mule deer neonate, but 1 year in, I don't believe probably is going to have a real dramatic effect on reducing the predation if it's really there. We'll still see it.
President Cloud. In an earlier presentation, they showed they caught a bunch of little black bears by Jackson. Is there any correlation here between, like you said, the bears move out? Is that why there was more in Jackson, some got pushed out, or can you make that supposition? Or
we have a pretty high density black bear population around that Jackson area in general, so we have a lot of bears moving in and out, and young females with young all around that area. And so, we tend to get quite a bit of conflict activity because of how the urban interface and everything is set up in that area. And a lot of those bears do tend to move out, though. We have collared bears in that country, and they'll end up down in the Wyoming range in 2 or 3 years.
What about the grizzly and the black bear? You got any grizzlies over there in the Grays River?
Not too many yet. We have a few that are running around there, but fairly low density.
How do they interact with grizzlies?
For the most part, they tend to separate themselves by how they're active during the time of day. Black bears, when they coexist with each other, black bears tend to be more active during the daytime hours, and grizzlies tend to be more active at dawn and dusk and at night. And so black bears just avoid them. You know, grizzlies take the prime time, and black bears move around whenever they can and just try to stay out of their way. But I don't believe in the Grays River that we have enough grizzlies that it really affects the black bear population yet.
Thank you. Anybody else? We see it.
Well, Dan, I guess since we're not going to mess with your quota like we're not going to do, I don't see any need for another presentation next year, and then, of course, the next year's the third year, so then probably, 2017 we'll be back. So I know we appreciate the efforts that you did this year on putting this together at the request last year when we messed with that quota. So with that, thank you.
Mr. President, I suggest you do want to see him next year. Just well, if you have a big change in that percent of females and the percent of adult females in the harvest, I think you should bring that to the commission next year, because that would be something I think you guys may want to act on. That is because it's going up. There's no doubt. It's going the way it's going up, and if it was to jump significantly, that third year of this experiment may not be something you'd want to continue to do.
I agree with President or Commissioner Clark there that we do want to know. And then maybe not a big presentation like this necessarily, but you know, if that's when we went into this thing, part of the agreement was we would review it and see.
Yeah, I'm quite interested myself in how this is going to play out. So I'm more than happy to come back and give another one if that's what you.
I was trying to give you a break.
Sorry, Mr. President. They still got the same number of sheep up there? I know one producer, I guess he rented some sheep. You know, they just got the same number of sheep up there as you did? Or?
No, there's still plenty of sheep.
Up there?
I don't know if it's the same or not. But, you know, depending on the year, we have conflict issues with sheep. 2012, we had a lot. This past year, we had very few. There's kind of cyclic depending on the natural food conditions and other things going on. So.
Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Nothing else for Sam, I guess. Okay, I got a blue slip from Mike. Got your slip here, Sam. All right here. You have the floor.
President Clotter, Director Talbot, Commission. First thing I'd like to say is this collaring these fawns that Dan's talking about is probably in this Wyoming range and sublet deer herd is going to be really a spectacular tool. And I'm championing around trying to get more people to buy collars because it's only as good as the collars we put out, you know. So this is going to, it's for Dan's end of the thing and management, the rest is really going to be a great tool, you know, when they can find mortality, and if they get causes out of it, it's going to settle a lot of this. The first thing I'd like to say about this Grays River bear area is nowhere in there have we got an idea how many bears are in there. I mean, we're talking percentages of kills, ages, and the rest, but is that kill ratio 5%? Is it 50%? I mean, the dynamics of what we're killing on the front country in a short window in the spring, what is that against the population? We have no idea. Myself, and Cy will back me up, and he's in the low country down below in the Grays River down below. I'm in the upper end of that management area. My area is under snow forever. I've got pictures of 13 bears on one site with those are sows with cubs, and another one I had 9, and the rest. In the past, you'd see maybe 2 sows with cubs that come in, you know, and that is ramping up as I look at my area exposure. In other words, the pictures that are being taken, and that's my concern. Last year, because this predators has always been the thing that nobody's challenged in here as far as our deer populations haven't recovered. And again this year, a big percentage of that sublet herd walks across this lease that I have that bans the front country there. And this year we had does with 3 fawns, does with 2 fawns, and I would love to have a collar on them to see where they came from. But there's still a significant, I mean, over 50% of the does went by had no fawns. And that's what I count. You know, the does that come out of there without a fawn. That's the concern is what happened to their fawns, you know. And these other ones that raised them, where were they living? But in that area where my bear baits are is one of the major fawning areas for that sublet herd. And I watch them at that time, and even after the thing's over, I still go up and watch and see what happens. And it's a major consideration to me that those bears do impact that fawning area. There's no doubt. I mean, and hopefully we'll get those results by these callers. But granting that extra 8 bears last year was huge. I mean, just first off, to come in the commission and have them give me a result was unbelievable. I've been here for about 40 years kicking the tires around here, and finally got the door opened up. We didn't really kill any bears in that thing till I think 10 days into the season because of weather. And we killed, my goal was to have the mortality somewhere exactly what happened around the last day of the season. Because in the past, as I will reiterate, that Memorial Weekend, that season's closed every year for the last how many years. It's just, that mortality just gets dissolved. Those people look at those young bears on their bait, they put up with them, and all of a sudden they see there's only 4 bears left that weekend. If there's 6, whatever it is, they closed it. And the patience showed this year. That as yesterday they were at the Dell Creek feed ground, and the biologist sits down there in the Grays River. He said, well, that 8 bears slowed down the junk show, is what he called it. He said, these guys go out and they just get rid of the cub shooters, he said, you know. And the real people that want to hunt trophy bears and the rest love that longer season because those big bears, that increases their opportunity to take a decent bear. From the outfitting industry, as Cy will relate, he doesn't book past Memorial Weekend because this year showed that, yes, we can get in there. But my concern is we had a very short season actually in the field. And today I would like to see 5 more bears added to that to get us closer to lengthen that season for the commission. You know, and I'm talking about generating income, scattering out money for an extra 15 days through the communities. And the impact that was recorded here is an impact in kill, not in population, because nowhere in here have you heard anything about how many bears we have down there. And if what's going on my pictures, and Cy will tell you the same, we're double the amount of bears. And when he talks about Jackson, every year I kill at least 1 or 2 that have a Christmas tree in their ears. They've caught them in Jackson 3 or 4 times, brought them down and kicked them out behind, and we kill them on the baits. So those bears that are up there in that area, they know what to do, and they bring them down there early enough so they'll get in trouble in front of a rifle. And we'll take it any time because generally they're mature. I would like them, even though President Clutter says that he's over it, I would like to get another 5 bears if I could possibly. It'd be huge. So I appreciate it. If you have any questions, or just tell me to sit down.
Go ahead and sit down.
First of all, I'm going to say, I don't think we want to do anything with the quota of bears and let this thing play itself out. Because we started something, let's see where it goes. The other thing is, your argument last year was that by getting later in the season, we were going to get some of those big bears. Do we see that in the harvest?
Mine was.
Did you get more?
Well, outfitters will, because we're trying to kill big bears.
Mm-hmm. But did you see more? Or did you get more big bears?
There was more bears on the bait late, but it started late. You know, bears came out late. But, you know, I don't want to construe this like, oh yeah, down through the years, The biggest bears, I'm higher elevation than Versailles is. Our bears, we kill our biggest bears when we used to hunt to the 30th of June. We killed our biggest bears because they were done mating and they were out getting lazy and wanting to get food. You know, we killed them, but the hides or whatever the reason was, I forget why now, but they cut the pit off. But we killed the biggest bears of all in late June in the past.
Been out
Doing it for 40 years.
Probably had a good dinner.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. Si.
President Clouda, Commissioners, and Director Talbot, Sam drugged me into this. I came kicking and screaming, but here I am. He said he was going to use my name several times. I'm like, great. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about the Grays River. I didn't show up last year when Sam came down here. Sam and I had several discussions about this. And the reason I didn't show up last year is because I was doing the right thing and working through the channel and working with the personnel in the field. I've had two really good meetings with the trophy game section, one in Jackson. It was about 2 hours, a year and a half ago. And I had another one about 5 months ago with the same group, with Jason Hunter and his group in Lander. And my contention has been, as an outfitter, dealing with this season, my contention has been for at least 3 years now, is that our mortality quota on females is not necessary in the Grays River area, that we could actually hunt those bears under a general license arrangement. And I get why we have the female mortality quota, and I know the history of it. I'm old enough to remember how Wyoming ended up with that. But our bear populations and our mountain lion populations have recovered to the level that I contend that we're managing them in an over conservative fashion rather than managing them as predators, as they truly are. Back up a little bit. When I first went to the Grays River 11 years ago, I bought the first camp, which actually outfits out of the Box Y, which is right in the middle of the Grays River. And I ran the numbers when I bought that camp, and I told the habit birders that I wasn't interested in hunting black bears in the Grays River because there's no money in hunting black bears. Our local game warden, who's still there, Todd Graham, made a special trip to come down and see me, and he basically said, here's the deal. You have to hunt bears in here. If you don't hunt bears in here, I'm going to spend all summer on damage problems with these bears killing sheep and all the problems that's going to take place. And I'm like, I didn't really understand the mechanics of the Grays River as to why that would be that important. But if you look at where the Box Y sits, it's halfway down the Grays River Road. And if a bear hunter's trying to come from Afton or Alpine to hunt there, he's got to go up the Grays River Road to the Box Y, 29 miles one direction, usually on a four-wheeler in the spring, and then beat his butt back out, which is 60 miles round trip. That's like driving from Casper to Orange Junction on a four-wheeler. And he has to do that every day to go hunt bears. And so really the only place you can actually run a feasible or kill bears feasibly in the Grays River is from the Box Y. And we're fortunate enough to have our operation run out of there. So after discussions with Todd, we decided that's the name of the local game board. We decided to go ahead and start running bears. So the first thing I want to paint to you guys is really important to understand this. This is not a greedy outfitter wanting more. This is not what it's about. In 2009, the entire outfitting industry in the state of Wyoming, spring and fall, ran, and nobody's going to believe this number, but this is the actual number. We ran a total of 112 bear hunters. Now that's everybody who comes into our camp with a bear license in their back pocket. That's everybody. We have to report them to the State Board of Outfitters. It's documented information. This is not a big part of our industry. And then in 2013, that number bumped up to a total of 148 clients statewide. That's, like I said, that's people come in and hunt in the fall, people come in spring, and it's documented through the State Board of Outfitters on our report. So it's not a huge part of our industry. The problem with the way we run our seasons is when you have that season closure. It's happened to me twice in the Grays River where I had clients coming in from out of state. They're all happy. They're on vacation. The last one was absolutely horrendous. I was in Dubois, Wyoming getting gas when I checked the mortality quota. Our season had just been closed. I have 4 clients in Yellowstone National Park vacationing, having a great time, ready to come down to the Grays River, go bear hunting with me. And I have to call them. I get them on their cell phone, and I have to tell them that the state of Wyoming has closed this season and they can't go bear hunting. this year. And I tell you what, you want to have a sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. Tell 4 guys that just drove up from Texas and make that phone call with them. So that started me thinking about the way we manage bears and our thought process on bears. And I think we've taken an animal that's basically a predator, and we've changed our whole thought process on them because society made us do that a number of 20 plus years ago. And it is a predator. I mean, we go down there and kill bears for a reason. We kill them for the sheepmen that are in the country, for the benefit of the ungulates that live in that country. That's why we do it. And I have figured out a way, whether you change these quotas or not, and being the kind of person that I am, I have figured out a way to make a profit off hunting bears. It costs me a lot of money, but I own a whole fleet of Yamahas with tracks on them because I know how to get into that country now, and I'm hunting bears in there for 2.5 weeks before a resident ever sets foot in that country because I have the financial resources and the ability to go in there and do that. And so now I don't hunt past Memorial Day, so I go in and get our own, so I never have to make that phone call to another non-resident hunter, which is, the way I refer to these non-resident hunters is they're your customers as well as they are mine. And so that's how I've come to solve this problem. But I truly believe if you take these numbers and what I'm asking you to do today is to direct the trophy games section to actually look at how we manage bears and take an honest look at managing them under a general license scenario instead of just this mindset that we're just locked in. We have to manage them. We have to create more. We have to build more. I don't think that's necessarily the case. If we knock these bears down in the Grays River to a level to where Tim Haberberger told it to me best. If we knock them down to where there's fewer and fewer bears coming to the baits and there's fewer and fewer success, people just quit hunting bears and they come back up. It's a secondary species. It's something that they do in addition to everything. Now, this is where I can help, and this is where I haven't done a very good job. But we have camera technology on these baits that we didn't have when I started hunting down there 11 years ago. Last year, we actually kept track. We have 22 active bait sites out in the spring, and we averaged 5.5 bears per bait per site. And that's just the bait sites that I'm running. And we know that the cameras are so good nowadays, you can identify bears, you can see color configurations on their shoulders, et cetera, et cetera. You know who these bears are. The number of females that we see with triplets is at least a half a dozen a year. We have a significant amount of bears down there. We're killing a lot of 5-year-old bears, there's no doubt about it. But it's because we have a lot of 5-year-old bears. We've had this incredible explosion of our bear population, and that's what we have. And for I'm really offended by that comment that that's not a trophy bear, because it is. A 5-year-old boar is almost a 6-foot bear. If for those of you who don't know what bears are, because that is a trophy bear, and they do get bigger and they do get larger in the Grays River. One of the biggest one we killed last year was eating sheep in the Green River. They dropped him over there 3 years ago. He has double earrings. We thought we killed a damn grizzly bear when we walked up to him, and he'd been dumped on us, and I call it the Game and Fish Stocking Program. And I told my local game ward, please give me more of those, because it was an incredible bear. And it's really neat because he has the earrings, so they know exactly where he came from, when he got in trouble eating sheep, what day they transplanted him, and everything. And he lived over there pretty good for 3 years. He didn't get in trouble till he screwed up and we killed him last year. So I guess that slide that I wanted those guys to put up in the trophy game section I'd like to put it back up here on the oh, great. All right. But anyway, this slide, when I saw it, it just floored me, because it actually made the point of what we're talking about. It's going to show the conflicts that they had around the state and around the Snowy Range. They have huge conflicts because we have such a short season down there, because the outfitters that I know that outfit down there, they absolutely struggle with whether or not they want to do this, because you work your butt off, you get all these baits out, you get going, and then boom, the season's closed. And so it's like, so why do you mess with it? And it's a very expensive proposition hunting bears. In the Grays River, for example, we do something totally different than most places ever did. Is we actually sit with these hunters on the bait at night. We put a guide with every hunter, and the reason we do that is because we are sensitive to the
to the fact that I don't want Chief Game Warden calling me up after we tip a grizzly bear over. So we do take that extra precaution, and we make sure we're there. The 11 years that we've been guiding in the Grays River, we've only documented one grizzly bear in that country, and he was actually, his tracks were going right down the main Grays River Road. He walked within a quarter of a mile of 3 of our baits, never touched any of our baits, and we kept on going. And so we don't really, in my opinion, we don't have a grizzly bear problem down there, but we do, in fact, we do go through there, but we don't have a grizzly bear problem. But we do take that caution of sitting with the clients just to make sure that we don't tip one on the city hall. We just don't want to do that. I don't mean to, and I'm definitely, don't take this the wrong way, but when you have discussions with the local game and fish that check these bears in, they will flat tell you that there is a disconnect on what they see on the ground and what the trophy game section is telling you today. And they say that our bear population has exploded in the Gray River. And we're killing a lot of 5-year-old bears. Yes, we are, but we have a lot of them. And it's anybody who hunts knows that's how it works. You don't kill what you have a lot of. If you're out hunting antelope and there's an incredible class of 3-year-old buck antelope out there, that's what's going to hit the ground, because that's the majority of what's out there. If you have an incredible class of these 4 and 5-year-old bears, which is what we do have, and I don't know what happened to cause that trigger in the population, but that's what's going to hit the ground. And these hunters don't necessarily always shoot for size of bear, they shoot for color of bear too. A lot of times with us in the Grays River, about 95% what we kill is a colored bear. It's one of the most unique places in the world that virtually every bear is a colored bear. We kill very few. We kill one black bear about every 3 years. Just so you know what I run in that country, I ran 16 spring bear hunts this year. We killed 10 bears. And I ran 9 fall bear hunts this year. We killed 5 bears. And the reason we only killed 5 bears this fall is because we had an incredible crop of berries, and it was actually really, really hard to get bears to come to the baits this fall. Fall bear hunting is generally one of the best kept secrets there is. It's actually usually a one-day hunt. But this year it was incredibly difficult because there was so much feed out there. And I'm babbling right now because I'm waiting for them to start that computer up, because this slide is really important for you to see. Killing me.
Si, which slide are you wanting to look at?
The slide I want you to see is the slide that showed the human conflicts, or the conflicts that they were having. Item 10.
The map slide?
Yeah, it's the one with all the dots.
The grizzly bear? That's grizzly bear.
Well, it's actually a slide with all the dots that shows where all the problems were.
14.
I think we'll go back to where bands.
We're going to be able to figure out exactly where our conflicts aren't.
Where you're talking about that.
Oh, I'm on the wrong presentation.
That'll be a giant presentation.
This is the one that they used to go on.
I'm sorry.
It's this one right here, Charles.
So we need to go back
What,
to
this one? This one right here.
large
Yeah,
carnivore.
that's drawn in presentation.
This slide here from the conflict one that
Large carnivore.
carnivore agenda
Yeah.
10, large carnivore conflict. It's,
Slide
second
number
slide
4.
in, third slide in, right after the guy, the definition of conflict.
And I didn't even realize this till I saw this presentation today. But when you pull that slide up and you look at the blue dots where all the problems are around the state, and you see there's a huge concentration of black bear problems in the Jackson area. You see a lot of black bear problems down around the Snowy. So you guys find that slide? All the blue dots.
Yep, yeah.
Do you notice see where the Grays River is?
That's what we're looking for.
The Grays River had one last year. Okay, and isn't that what we're trying to accomplish with killing these animals? Is trying to stop? Isn't that better that we're actually harvesting these animals rather than letting them just have problems and the game fish has to come in and deal with them? They have to trank these bears and relocate them or whatever. You look down the Snowy Range, there must be 20 blue dots there, and in the Grays River, there's one. I mean, so I was joking with Dan. I said I should get a citation from the Game and Fish, an award of certificate, because we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is killing these things so that you guys aren't dealing with conflicts. That's the whole idea of game management. In my mind, anyway. Thought I'd end with that, but
Well, Mr.
There
President,
it is up there.
there's a slide now. Shoot.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Here's a great view up here. See this, this blue dot is underneath Jacksonville, the blue dot right there, that's the great river. All that country in there, you have a little one over here, a little one over here, so all that country, we
Basically had very few conflicts last year, which is, I think that's the plan. I mean, we had more in Casper than we did over there. Questions?
Yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
Well, I have a comment. I thank, Cy, I thank both you and Sam for commenting on this, and I appreciate the thank you on behalf of the commission for the fact that we increased the numbers last year. So it looked to me like the Game and Fish is kind of looking at this in 3-year segments.
Yes.
And as a commission, we've already encouraged them to come back again next year, and because we've made a significant change, or a change anyway, and we want to keep on top of it. And I think your point may be very valid, and I'm glad to see that we're getting into the numbers. But rather than take it, this is just my personal opinion, rather than take a jump again this year, I'd rather stick with what we've done and come back and look at it next year. By the time, I guess I'd like to look at that another 3-year segment. I'm not saying I wouldn't make a change or consider one next year, but I'd be 2 years into it and looking at what they're doing. And the reason that I say this is that no matter what, some of the public is always going to have a little difficulty with the idea of females.
Mm-hmm.
That's an issue. Thankfully, in Wyoming, we still are willing to allow them to be hunted. But you make valid points. I just personally like to see us continue on the present path for at least another year, maybe the 3-year period. I don't know, but at least another year.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I'm not here asking you to increase the female mortality quota at all. What I'm here is because Sam made me come. But second of all, what I am asking you to do, and my discussions with the trophy game management section is we need to look seriously between now and when we make our next quotas. Is it a good idea or not to consider managing bears in some areas of the state under a general license system in the spring, not a female mortality quota system? I contend with, and I've told these guys the same thing. If you took a 10-year snapshot of the bear harvest and put that over here to how many females we're killing, I contend you can control the entire harvest by manipulating the season length when you open it and when you close it. Because bears are notorious, and they're exactly right. The bear plan, which is actually a well-written plan, and I've read it several times, it talks about the fact as the season progresses, you start killing more and more females because, and that's what we see where we're at too. When we're in there in early May, we have nothing but boars on our baits, period. And the sows have not come out of hibernation yet. And as the season progresses and we get into June, more and more sows show up on the baits because, once again, it's because camera technology. We have these pictures of these sows with their babies, and they show up, and then we start seeing them show up on the baits. And as the season progresses into June, is when your sows become more vulnerable because they are on the baits. It's not in May. It's not in early May, and so you can actually manipulate this season how you want. Now, one of the things, obviously, is resident pressure and when they're available to go hunting and stuff like that. And we have to be sensitive to that. All I'm saying is that I think it's fair to look at, take a hard look at how we manage them, the female mortality quota versus a general license season. That's all I'm asking. And I think it's a fair question. I think it's a fair, just because we've done something for 20 years doesn't mean we continue doing it.
Fair enough. I appreciate that.
Questions or comments for Cy? Cy? Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm
Dan.
good.
No, come on up, Dan.
Thanks, Cy. And we've met with Cy multiple times about this. And I think
maybe next year, if we do come forward, we could try to bring some of this information by week, what kind of harvest that we're looking for, in an update fashion, like we've done before. So I think that would be something we could easily do and be edification for the commission as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I remember years ago, and it's probably with Mike and I just remember, we had a presentation about why we went with the decision to use female harvest targets in bears. And I think maybe perhaps for this group, I don't know that you guys actually heard that. It was a really good presentation and it made sense once you listened to it. Might be worth bringing that back in, Dan, to explain this to the commission again, why we went from the general seasons back to female harvest quota. The biology was right, as I recall, why we did that.
Okay, they'll do it. Won't you, Dan? Dan? Dan and Dan show. Okay.
Dan and D.
Sure, come on up, Sam.
You know, like I said, I've been kicking down here for a lot of years. We have some old timers in this industry of ours. When they see that red shirt, their face gets as red as the shirt. And I think they're going to have to die for secure that, you know. But since Director Talbot showed up, and I look around me at what we have in here, the communication, and it's hard to explain, you know, from the frustrations through the years. But our game and fish department is the solace it's ever been, and damn it, I mean, it's special to have this kind of communication. And the rest, it really is. I mean, and I wish I could reiterate this better, but I mean, it's the real deal now. I mean, everybody that has their head in the right place can come in, communicate, and discuss it and get the answers, whether they like it or not, but we get an answer. And I was teasing Commissioner Clark earlier about this commission. This is the first commission that I've been in front of that isn't rubber stamped, you know. I mean, and like he said, that's because we're the best, you know, but no, but seriously, I just want to commend both ends of this table because I understand it's your last go around. And yeah, and I'm just after the middle bunch now. Is these next ones that sit down, set the example, and let's get this communication, because I mean, I don't even know how to explain how real this is when you come down here finally and get it communicated, whether you get the answers you want. It's just the idea you come in here. I'll drive down here from Jackson. There used to be, what the hell are you going down there for? You're just wasting your time. I said, yeah, but I'm going to show up. But not anymore. You know, you can express yourself, get chosen, you guys, you know, and it's just unbelievable the transition we've made in the last 7, 8 years, 10 years. I mean, it's spectacular. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Appreciate it, Sam.
Intellectual bookend?
I was going to use the Oreo cookie definition, but I couldn't come up with anything with saying look in the middle of a cookie. So
All I know is I'm glad I'm wearing a skirt because it's getting deep.
yeah, okay. We just thought we'd help you out there.
All right, John, I guess we're going to whiz through some legislative stuff.
Killing a lot of trees, man.
More stuff.
Safe travels. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot. As you know, the 2015 legislative session began last week. The purpose of this discussion today is to give you an update early in the session on some bills that affect the Commission and the Department. I guess I'll start the update. Let me just explain what you've got and what you received on Friday. Most of you got an email on Friday with some of this information.
First, I just want to mention the process that we have, and this process has been updated during the last 2 or 3 years. It's a rather intense process internally with the department. A very aggressive team from the field all the way up through the director's office to the commission that takes a lot of time on all of these bills. And if you're interested in seeing and learning more about that process, I'd be glad to talk to you more about that at some point as to how we track these every day and everything that's going on here during the session. In your packets, what you were given today is a spreadsheet you had access to through the link on the email on Friday. I don't know if that link, some had some problems with that link, so we're going to try to fix that over the next couple of weeks. And as we send these updates to you, and most will come from Glenn Pauley or myself or the director, as these updates come to you and there's any problems with the printing out or getting links or things like that, or you're not getting the information that you need, be sure to let us know. We're still trying to work out some things in this process to make sure you get what you need. In those folders, in what you got that Scott Cochran just handed you today, the blue and the red folders, you have the legislative information sheets for both the House and the Senate bills that we have so far, at least as of yesterday. That information was provided in summary format to you Friday in that email. So you've seen that information. It's not new. We just didn't want to send you all of those final LISs electronically and bombard you with one email. So that's why you have those today. As of yesterday, and I guess we should maybe not look at the LISs right now, but more on the spreadsheet. And I'll try to kick this off for us, and then I can turn this over to Director Talbot, some of the chiefs and others that are following these bills more intensely than I am. But as of yesterday, the department's tracking 20 bills and monitoring another 19 bills. And as you saw in the information, this is the same as last year, that tracking requires the development of the legislative information sheet, including a summary of impacts in the fiscal notes. Monitoring requires simply following that bill through the progression through the legislative session. We received, and others here of staff, correct me if you have more information, but just today, 3 other bills have been filed. HB 165, access to public land. SF 113, mule deer, white-tailed deer, separating out the hunting licenses, and resident preference points. Is that right? Those 3? Those are not on the spreadsheet yet. They were just filed today. If you look at the spreadsheet, have we learned of other bills, Director Talbot, in addition to those that we know of?
108, is 108 on here?
108 should be on there. Yep. Okay, looking at the spreadsheet real quick.
By the land restrictions.
You see, obviously, the bill number starting with the House on the far left, and it goes across. You see the department lead, which is real important. You have questions on these bills, those are the folks to call. You will see pretty much everything related to that particular bill. And again, going down through these, you received a paragraph on each of these Fridays, so I won't go through each bill. I'd rather open it up to see if you've got any questions on any specific bills. And again, before this discussion ends, be sure to let us know what you'd like to receive every week for updates on these bills. But I guess I would open it up, unless Director Talbot, you want to highlight anything specific on here first, or just open it up to some questions on specific
President,
bills.
members of the commission, thanks, John. I appreciate it. And John is correct. There is a huge amount of work that goes into tracking and monitoring these bills. And I just want to make the point that they can change very, very rapidly as they're amended on the floor. The intent of the bill can literally change from something that has no effect on us to something that significantly would impact the way the agency and the commission would operate. I would just point out 2 bills for your information. Senate File 12 was an interim topic on the judiciary, and the short title of that bill is trespassing to collect data. That bill, if it passes in its current form, would make a high misdemeanor out of any individual who either intentionally or inadvertently enters private property to collect data. And that could have significant ramifications on our people. We have expressed the concerns we had on that bill throughout the process. That bill has not changed. In addition to that, Senate File 108, access to private land, places some new and I guess we'll see how onerous restrictions as it moves forward on law enforcement, game and fish law enforcement entering private property. Those are two issues that you should be aware of. I know where one is.
John, I think you asked the question, what would we want to receive individually, and I'll start the conversation. I think that the information that we receive normally weekly and from Glenn, I think it is, yeah. And I think in this form of the bill, we're monitoring 20 bills, and I certainly I don't need to know about the ones that we're not even interested in, like the industrial siding stuff. I know that Mary is probably tracking that. State park fees, those kind of things. If we could get what we're tracking and, the medium, low, and high impact would be all I would need. And with a question, you would call the department lead. Whatever else. If somebody else needs more than that, then here's your chance, I guess.
Yeah, Mr. President, members of the commission, and we're trying to give you enough information so when you get calls from the public, you also can answer questions in that regard. So the summary information or the full legislative information sheet, that's why we're providing that. And if you want, we'll continue to do that.
I love it. This is great.
Good stuff.
And it's just, and I even like the additional ones at the end. And I'm like President Cloud. I mean, I don't need you to go to huge effort on those additional, the ones that have been determined not to have an impact. But it's kind of nice to know what's out there. I don't have time to get on every day and look up. I mean, it is a lot of work. I know because I've tried to do that often enough. But I can look on this on a weekly basis. And when I see those bill numbers, and if it's something that I want to read it exactly as it is, I can pull it up. And it's just, I can't say enough about what a great job you're doing.
Mr. President,
Dr. Talbot.
members of the commission, and I guess I'd just like to reiterate what John just mentioned as far as calling us. If you have any questions, and there may be sometimes in situations where we don't have all the information on a particular bill, we're continuing to work on it. But if you have any questions whatsoever on these bills, please feel free to call the director's office, and we'll try to get you whatever information we can as well.
I'm gonna look at this, you didn't put all this information on the internet, email like this.
Mr. President, Commissioner Price, there was a link to get into this spreadsheet. Yeah, and a couple of you have talked to me already. You had problems with that link. I don't know if you did, but a couple did.
I haven't. But what I'm saying is, one of the things, if in that link or connection, you had a summary of the things that are going to impact. I mean, some of these things, like minimum wage, is probably not going to impact the department, in the immediate term. It's going to maybe affect the employees and stuff. The boards and commissioners, removal of appointed members. If we had a summary of the things that are going to affect us on that, and I'll take this really from the stock growers. They have a summary they keep on the website, and it's not the whole legislative process. It is just the ones that are going to impact stock growers. And you can, go onto that website and pick that up anytime, And of course, one of those bills, of course, is that one, 12, I think it is, Senate File 12. Yeah. And of course, that's a high profile one. I guess what I'm saying is reducing the amount of information to the things that are really, pertinent there. I mean, I'm not likely to get a call from, stock growers on something. They're going to call up over there with Gagner or one of the vice presidents or something there. But there is a chance, I'll be getting a call from this 108.
Right. But do you have a problem, Commissioner Price, with, these might still be of interest to us. Are you concerned with having to scroll down too many times? I'm not making fun. I'm actually asking because I like having all of these on here myself.
In the simplest situation, I don't know a problem, but I guess I will say, yes, you start just scrolling down and just number, and your eyes kind of begin to go like that.
Well, that's why I asked you, because I wasn't trying to make fun. I can understand that and how you're wanting to do that. I guess my concern would be, I like that they've gone to such an effort to put all of these down because we may not all have the same, if they summarized it and made a choice on what they thought was the most important impacts, it may not always be the same as, we might all have a difference of opinion that way.
But I guess.
I hate to have them summarize it too much.
Yep.
Okay, if you understand what I'm saying. But I appreciate what you're saying.
What I'm saying is, you have a limited amount of time. They have the knowledge of how those bills are going to affect the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And if they had those, I'm going to say a summary, you can put the whole thing on, but have those there where you can look at them. And somebody calls you up and you might get a call on some of these. And there, and you can just go look at that bill right there, where we're monitoring.
Well, I think
otherwise, if they give you a number, you can look through the whole bunch too.
Well, anyway, I like it the way it's coming. And of course,
yeah, and if you have any other ideas, just call us. Give us a call, like Scott said. This spreadsheet's really the key document for you. And these things change almost every day. And this is a live spreadsheet, if you will. When you hit these links, it will reflect up-to-date changes that have been made constantly on a regular basis. So this is really, really important. So if you're having problems navigating this, make sure we know about it so we can try to get that worked out. And any other ideas, give us a call. Any questions on any specific bills?
Anything for John?
Yeah, I don't know if they know that Clark's going off with this HB 35 removal of appointed members. What's that about?
They tried to get us before like
Yeah.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot, can you give an update on that one? I don't know an awful lot about it.
Okay, that's fine.
I will get some information to you, though.
Okay, are we done? We beat that?
I wouldn't be surprised if it have to do
Okay.
with the superintendent.
Before we have a call, I'm sorry, John.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, Mr. President, members of the Commission, if we may, our Communications Director, Randy McKay, has something he'd like to share with the Commission. And if he could just give you a couple of comments about what this is, that would be great.
Just one. President Louder, Commission, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. This is just we feel like it's in pretty good shape. We've vetted it pretty closely. And what the idea with this is that as I came on, one of the things the director kind of asked me to kind of tackle, and previous folks in the communications role have looked at this and come up with drafts, but really feel like that there's not people really who would be in this room, but people who the general public who don't have a great understanding of exactly what the Game and Fish Department does, and then also for our stakeholders, legislators, trying to lay out some of the key information about budget, revenue, employee history, where we're at with those things. So this is really trying to just give you that quick 30,000-foot overview. So if you wanted to go around and speak to folks, you could take this with you. If department personnel were going somewhere to speak to a group, they'd have something quick and easy to hand out. This was done with in-house staff, so a minimal cost to the department, but pretty easy to have this. And I think we'd be really open to updating it too as we go forward. But we'd like to have something to give out even during this legislative session for both legislators and stakeholders who are around town and around the state, kind of looking at the game and fish department. So if you have any feedback on that, it is still just draft, but find me at the bar tonight and tell me your thoughts.
Thanks, Randy. I think, Randy, this is, I think, a good thing.
Excellent.
Right here, because you give a quick look and have an answer for at least the simple parts of it.
Is it, and I guess my question is, just looking at it, is it something that can be amended as you go along? Obviously, you've got wolf management here, which is right on, is where we are today. But if that changes tomorrow, then is it amendable?
We are, President Cloud, we are looking at printing probably somewhere around 1,000, so we could have some in each region over the next few months. But my thought and my suggestion is that we don't make this kind of the brochure for the agency for the next couple of years. That we just have this. We put the date on it on the front page, so people, as you go out, that one was accurate as of January 2015, but maybe as of even August of 2015, we might want to update it one more time.
Okay. Is this on the website? Yeah, that's what it is.
At this point, no. It is. I think if you see any big concerns, then we could try to make some fixes to it over the next couple of days. But maybe as of next week, we'd have it on the website and have printed copies for all of you.
It is on the website.
There, a lot of it was done by people before me too, and great work from a lot of people from fiscal, making sure that the numbers are all right and double checking them. So it was a real big team effort. So thanks.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you.
I just asked there because it's something you can update. If it changes next month on like the wolf or something, you can update it pretty quick.
Commissioner Price, absolutely. I think that'll be a good thing about having it on our website is that if it becomes outdated in February of 2015, we'll change it there right away.
Thanks, Rennie.
Thank you.
Okay. Tomorrow, we're going to add a real short agenda item right after. Let me get here. Right after agenda item 23. Between that and the director's report, Commissioner Little and Commissioner Culver are going to give us a very brief update on the recent WAFWA meeting. For those of us that didn't make it down there because we were in Hawaii, so.
No, we weren't.
It was a bad deal. So that we're going to do that tomorrow. And with that said, we would ask if there's anybody from the audience that would like to get up to and have any words of wisdom before we depart. That said, we would like to acknowledge David Williams, our former legal rep. Welcome. Are you here for the freebie tonight? Are you?
Of course.
Yeah. I want to remind everybody we're having a reception for Commissioners Clark and Haley in the Teton room over in the big building. So you're certainly welcome to join us over there at 5:30, 40 minutes from now. With that said, if there's no further business, we are adjourned.
Good job.
Yeah, in the Teton room over there.
The what?